My name is Clara. I am 32 years old. My husband looked at the positive pregnancy test, laughed in my face, and handed me his medical records. He said he had a vasectomy 2 years ago and demanded to know who the father was. Before I could even process the shock, he threw me out into the freezing rain with a pre-packed suitcase. But the next morning, as I sat shivering in my car with exactly $12 to my name, my phone rang. A lawyer informed me that my first husband from 2012 had left me his entire $88 million fortune. But there was a condition. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. I stood in the expansive foyer of our custom-built modern home in the affluent suburbs of Chicago. My hands were shaking so uncontrollably that the small plastic stick almost slipped from my fingers. 2 solid pink lines. Pregnant. For 3 long, agonizing years, my husband Bradley and I had been trying to start a family. We had endured endless doctor visits, hormone treatments, and silent, tearful nights when another month ended in disappointment. Or so I had believed. Bradley was 34 years old, a highly ambitious real estate developer whose charm in the boardroom was only matched by his arrogance behind closed doors. I was a vintage and art appraiser. I ran a boutique firm that I had poured my absolute soul into evaluating estate collections and antique pieces for high net worth clients. From the outside, our marriage was the picture of upper middle class success. We hosted elegant Thanksgiving dinners and spectacular Christmas parties. We were the couple everyone envied. I walked into the living room, my heart hammering with sheer joy, ready to share the miracle that our grueling fertility journey was finally over. Bradley was standing by the gray leather sofa, nursing a glass of scotch. A large, heavy suitcase sat ominously on the hardwood floor next to him. I smiled, holding out the test tears of happiness brimming in my eyes. I told him we were finally going to be parents. I expected him to drop his glass to sweep me into his arms to celebrate the end of our heartbreak. He did not smile. He did not step forward. Instead, a cold, mocking laugh escaped his lips, echoing through the high ceilings of our perfect home. He set his glass down, walked over to his Italian leather briefcase, pulled out a stark white medical document, and slapped it hard against my chest. I caught the paper as it fluttered down, my vision blurring as I read the clinical header. It was a surgical report dated exactly 2 years ago. A confirmed successful vasectomy. My brain completely short-circuited. I stared at the harsh black ink, unable to comprehend the reality of what I was holding. I had a vasectomy 2 years ago. Clara? He sneered, his voice dropping into a tone of absolute disgust. So why do not you tell me exactly whose bastard you are carrying? I stood frozen, the floor feeling as though it were collapsing beneath my feet. 2 years ago, we were supposedly actively trying. We were tracking my ovulation cycles. We were attending fertility clinics together. He had watched me cry in the bathroom month after month when the tests came back negative. He had held my hand, offering fake comfort, while secretly knowing it was biologically impossible for me to get pregnant by him. He had watched me inject myself with hormones, knowing it was all a devastating lie. I did not sleep with anyone else. I stammered, my voice breaking into a desperate sob. Bradley, this makes absolutely no sense. I have never been with another man. I swear to you. Save your pathetic lying tears for the divorce judge, he barked, his face twisting with manufactured rage. He lunged forward, grabbing my arm with bruising force, and began dragging me toward the front door. He had already packed my clothes. He had been planning this ambush. He knew exactly what he was doing, and he was executing it with chilling precision. He shoved me out the front door, throwing the heavy suitcase out behind me. It hit the wet driveway pavement, the zipper bursting open and spilling my clothes directly into the freezing autumn rain. Get off my property before I call the cops and have you removed for trespassing, he shouted, his voice echoing over the thunder. The heavy oak door slammed shut. The deadbolt clicked into place with a terrifying, permanent finality. I fell to my knees on the wet concrete, the icy rain soaking instantly through my thin cardigan. I scrambled to gather my ruined clothes, sobbing uncontrollably into the dark night. The man I loved and trusted had deceived me for years, framed me for infidelity, and thrown me out into the street like discarded garbage. As I zipped the broken suitcase with numb, freezing fingers, a flicker of warm yellow light caught my eye. I looked up at the second-floor window of our master bedroom. The heavy velvet curtain was pulled back slightly. A woman was standing there looking down at me. Then Bradley stepped into the frame. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind and kissed her neck, a gesture so intimate it made me physically sick. A jagged, breathless gasp tore from my throat. I recognized the woman. I recognized the emerald green silk nightgown she was wearing because I had bought it for her last Christmas. It was Madison, my 30-year-old sister, the undisputed golden child of our family, the glamorous, ruthless real estate broker who always manipulated her way into getting whatever she wanted. She looked down at me, shivering in the rain, smiled a victorious, chilling smile, and slowly closed the curtains. I dragged my broken suitcase to my 10-year-old Honda Civic, a car Bradley had always insisted I park on the street because it ruined the aesthetic of his pristine driveway. My hands trembled so violently I could barely insert the key into the ignition. The double betrayal sliced through my chest like physical blades. My husband and my sister. They had been plotting this together. The sick realization washed over me that the child I was carrying must be Bradley's, but the vasectomy paper was his twisted exit strategy to ruin my life and clear the path for Madison. I drove blindly through the storm tears, blurring the streetlights, until muscle memory guided me to my parents' house in the affluent gated community across town. I needed my parents. I desperately needed my mother, Patricia, to hold me, and my father, Richard, to tell me they would protect me. I used my spare key to unlock their grand mahogany front door, shivering, dripping wet, and gasping for air. The living room was brightly lit, the fireplace roaring warmly. My mother, Patricia, and my father, Richard, were sitting on the expensive velvet sofas, and sitting right across from them, holding a delicate porcelain teacup, as if she had not just been standing in my husband's bedroom 20 minutes ago, was Madison. She had clearly rushed over here before me, knowing I would come running home. Before I could even open my mouth to expose the horrifying truth, my mother stood up, marched across the oriental rug, and struck me across the face with a resounding, vicious slap. The force of it snapped my head to the side, leaving my cheeks stinging with fiery pain. "Bradley called us!" Patricia screamed, her face contorted with absolute rage. "How dare you? How dare you cheat on such a good, successful man? You have completely humiliated this family. Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" I touched my burning cheek, staring at the woman who gave birth to me in pure shock. "Mom," I cried, my voice shattering. "He is lying. He handed me a fake medical report. I did not cheat on him. Madison was just at my house with him. They are having an affair. They planned this." "Stop lying to cover up your filthy behavior," my father, Richard, bellowed, standing up and pointing a furious, trembling finger at me. "Madison has been here all evening helping us plan the Thanksgiving charity dinner. Do not you dare drag your sister into your pathetic mess, just because you are a failure." I looked over at Madison. She was wearing a completely different outfit now, a modest cashmere sweater and slacks, her hair perfectly styled. She looked at me with wide, innocent eyes that entirely masked the predatory gleam underneath. She had established her alibi perfectly. She had beaten me to the punch and manipulated my parents before I even arrived. "Clara, you need to get professional help," Madison said, her voice dripping with fake, sickening sympathy. "Bradley told us you have been acting erratic and sneaking around for months. You should just leave quietly and have some dignity instead of making up these crazy delusions about me." I felt like I was completely losing my mind. They had orchestrated this perfectly. My parents had always blatantly favored Madison. When we were younger, my parents literally forced me to hand over my college savings fund so Madison could afford her lavish out-of-state university tuition. They always viewed my appraisal business as a cute little hobby, even though I worked grueling 80-hour weeks while treating Madison's real estate career like she was a titan of industry. "You are actually taking their side?" I asked my parents, my voice cracking under the crushing weight of the injustice. I am your daughter. I am pregnant, and I have nowhere to go. You are a liability, my father snapped, stepping closer with a threatening glare. Listen to me very carefully. I own 30% of your appraisal firm. If you do not sign the divorce papers Bradley gives you tomorrow morning without causing a public scandal, I will legally freeze the company accounts and leave you with absolutely nothing. Now get out of my house. You are polluting the air. Patricia turned her back on me, wrapping a comforting protective arm around Madison. I stood there, freezing rain dripping from my hair onto their pristine hardwood floor, realizing the devastating, undeniable truth. They were not misled. They simply did not care about me. I was the family scapegoat, the sacrificial lamb meant to protect the golden child's reputation and keep the wealthy son-in-law happy. I turned around and walked back out into the violent storm. I drove to a 24-hour supermarket parking lot, killed the engine, and curled up in the back seat under a damp, foul-smelling coat. I had lost my marriage, my home, my family, and potentially my business, all in the span of 3 agonizing hours. The freezing cold seeped deep into my bones as I stared up at the harsh fluorescent lights of the parking lot, crying until my eyes burned, wondering how I was going to survive the next day. The harsh, glaring morning sun woke me. Every muscle in my body ached from sleeping cramped in the back of the Honda. I pulled out my phone with stiff fingers and opened my banking app. $12.40. Bradley had already moved with ruthless efficiency, draining our joint checking and savings accounts overnight. He had ensured I had absolutely zero financial resources to fight him or hire an attorney. He wanted me desperate and compliant. As I sat there calculating how many days I could possibly survive on cheap bread and tap water, an unknown local number flashed on my screen. I answered it, my voice raspy, weak, and utterly exhausted. "Is this Clara?" a formal, deep voice asked. "Yes," I replied hesitantly, fearing it was one of Bradley's lawyers calling to deliver another blow. "My name is Mr. Harrington. I am a senior attorney with Harrington and Associates. I need you to come to my office immediately. It concerns the estate of Leo." The name sent a massive shockwave through my entire system, paralyzing me in the driver's seat. Leo, my high school sweetheart, my very first love. We had eloped in 2012 when we were young, broke, and fiercely unconditionally in love. But my parents absolutely despised him because he was a struggling software programmer with no pedigree and no money. They waged a relentless psychological war on us, threatening to destroy his career prospects and constantly harassing us until the immense pressure finally broke our young marriage. We divorced a year later, and I had not seen or spoken to him since. "Leo," I asked, my heart pounding against my ribs. "What about him? Is he okay?" "I am deeply sorry to inform you that Leo passed away 2 days ago," Mr. Harrington said gently, his tone solemn. "He named you as his primary beneficiary. You need to be here today." I drove to the towering glass skyscraper downtown in a complete daze, my mind struggling to process the flood of information. The elegant receptionist guided me into a massive, luxurious corner office with breathtaking panoramic views of the city skyline. Mr. Harrington, an older gentleman with sharp, piercing gray eyes, gestured for me to sit in a plush leather chair. "Leo never forgot you, Clara." Mr. Harrington began handing me a thick, heavy leather-bound folder embossed with gold lettering. After the divorce, he moved to the West Coast and developed a revolutionary cybersecurity algorithm that completely transformed the tech industry. He became a billionaire, remaining completely anonymous to the public and the media, and he left his entire fortune, $88 million, directly to you. I stopped breathing. The massive walls of the office seemed to spin rapidly. $88 million. I looked down at the crisp legal documents, seeing my name printed clearly next to financial figures that looked completely unreal. I traced the numbers with my finger, a tear slipping down my cheek for the boy who had loved me enough to remember me a decade later. "But there is a specific condition attached to this inheritance," Mr. Harrington said, folding his hands precisely on the mahogany desk. His tone grew incredibly serious, anchoring me back to reality. "Leo kept close tabs on you over the years. He knew exactly what your parents did to him, and he knew how they continued to treat you. He knew about Madison. And most importantly, he knew exactly what kind of monster Bradley really is. How could he possibly know all that I whispered in shock? Leo hired elite private investigators to ensure you were safe from a distance. When he discovered Bradley was systematically isolating you and draining your assets, he tried to intervene, but his illness escalated far too quickly. The condition of this inheritance is strictly outlined. You cannot just divorce Bradley and run away quietly. Leo stipulated that you must legally prove Bradley's infidelity and expose his financial fraud within 60 days to gain 100% autonomy over the trust. If you fail, or if you simply walk away without fighting back, the entire $88 million goes to various charities. I stared at him, my mind racing at 1,000,000 miles an hour. Financial fraud, I asked? Mr. Harrington nodded grimly. Bradley is not the massively successful real estate developer he claims to be. He is drowning in millions of dollars of toxic debt and engaging in highly illegal financial activities to keep his projects afloat. Leo wanted you to fight back. He wanted you to utterly destroy the people who broke you. He wanted you to take back your power and reclaim your life. I looked down at my trembling hands. Just yesterday, I was begging for my parents' love. I was weeping outside a locked door in the freezing rain, completely shattered by my sister's ultimate betrayal. But sitting in this magnificent office, looking at the monumental legacy of a man who truly deeply loved me, the sadness and the desperation evaporated entirely. It was replaced by a cold, burning, unstoppable resolve. They had thrown me to the wolves, thinking I would quietly perish in the cold. They did not realize I was going to return as the leader of the pack. Mr. Harrington reached into his desk drawer and placed a heavy, solid brass safe deposit key right in front of me. Leo left this specifically for you, he said, his eyes locking intensely onto mine. He knew exactly what kind of man Bradley was, and he prepared the exact weapon you need to destroy him. Are you ready to go to war, Clara? I reached out and picked up the cold metal key. My grip tightened until my knuckles turned pure white. I thought about the fake vasectomy papers. I thought about the slap from my mother. I thought about the wicked smirk on Madison's face. Yes, I said, my voice steady, clear, and completely devoid of fear. Let the war begin. I walked out of the towering glass building with the heavy brass key clutched in my pocket. The violent storm from the previous night had completely passed, leaving the Chicago streets slick and gleaming under the midday sun. My tears were entirely gone. The terrified, heartbroken woman who had begged for mercy in the freezing rain had died in that parking lot. The woman who unlocked the door of her beat-up Honda Civic was someone entirely different. I had a fortune waiting for me and a brilliant legal team backing my every move, but I could not claim any of it until I exposed the monster I had married. I drove straight back to the sprawling suburban house I had shared with Bradley. The very same house he had violently thrown me out of just hours prior. I parked in the driveway right behind his pristine black Range Rover. I took a deep, steadying breath, practicing the exact expression of a broken, desperate woman who had nowhere else to turn. I let my shoulders slump, made sure my eyes looked wide and panicked, and unlocked the front door. Bradley was standing in the immaculate kitchen pouring himself an espresso. He froze when he saw me walk in. He clearly expected me to be crawling to a homeless shelter or begging my parents for forgiveness. He slammed his espresso cup down on the marble counter, his face twisting into an ugly scowl. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, taking a threatening step forward. "I told you to get off my property." I forced my entire body to tremble. I let a sob catch in my throat, playing the part of the defeated victim flawlessly. I told him my parents had kicked me out and I had absolutely zero money in my accounts. I begged him to let me stay just until I could figure out my next move. I promised I would stay out of his way and not cause any trouble. Bradley stopped and stared at me. A sickening, triumphant smile slowly spread across his handsome face. He absolutely loved seeing me reduced to nothing. His colossal ego thrived on the power dynamic. He walked over to me, looking down at me as if I were a piece of dirt on his expensive Italian shoes. "You are incredibly pathetic, Clara," he sneered, crossing his arms over his chest. "But I am a reasonable man. I will allow you to sleep on the living room sofa until the divorce is finalized. However, my charity comes with a steep price." He turned around, walked over to his leather briefcase on the kitchen island, and pulled out a thick stack of legal documents. He tossed them onto the counter with a loud smack. It was a quitclaim deed and a property transfer agreement. He wanted me to sign away my 50% equity in our custom-built home. "Sign these by the end of the week," he commanded. "You surrender your claim to this house and I will agree to keep your disgusting infidelity out of the public divorce records. I will not drag your name through the mud if you cooperate. You walk away with nothing but you get to keep whatever tiny shred of dignity you have left." The sheer audacity of his lie was breathtaking. He was holding my supposed affair over my head, using the fake pregnancy narrative to blackmail me out of my own hard-earned equity. I wanted to scream at him. I wanted to slap the smug look right off his face. But I remembered Mr. Harrington's strict instructions. I had to gather evidence. I had to let him feel invincible. I covered my face with my hands and let out a loud, miserable cry. I nodded weakly, acting completely devastated. I told him I just needed a few days to process everything and read over the paperwork. Bradley bought the act completely. He laughed, grabbed his car keys, and told me not to touch anything in the master bedroom. The front door clicked shut as he left for his office, leaving me completely alone in the massive house. As soon as his engine faded down the street, my tears instantly vanished. My posture straightened. I wiped my face and went straight back to my car to retrieve the small, unassuming duffel bag Mr. Harrington had given me. Inside were state-of-the-art micro cameras and audio recording devices. I spent the next 4 hours turning our home into a highly secure surveillance fortress. I worked with meticulous precision. I placed a microscopic lens inside the binding of a thick hardcover book in his home office, giving me a perfect view of his desk and computer screen. I tucked another camera behind the ornate crown molding in the living room. I hid a tiny audio transmitter completely out of sight under the marble edge of the kitchen island, where he took most of his business calls. I synced everything to a secure encrypted application on my phone. That evening, Bradley returned home. I stayed huddled on the living room sofa beneath a heavy blanket, clutching a mug of tea, playing the role of the defeated wife to perfection. He completely ignored my presence, treating me like a ghost. He poured himself a drink and immediately started pacing the kitchen while making frantic phone calls. He assumed I was too devastated and too stupid to pay any attention to his business dealings. Through my wireless earpiece hidden beneath my hair, I listened intently to every single word he said. He was arguing aggressively with contractors, investors, and loan officers. His voice was tight with suppressed panic. The name Oak Ridge came up repeatedly in every single conversation. "I need more time on the mezzanine debt," Bradley hissed into his phone, slamming his fist against the marble counter. "Do not pull the funding now. The escrow clears next week. I just need you to float the bridge loan until the end of the month. I swear the permits are coming through." I waited patiently in the dark until he finally went upstairs to sleep. Once I heard his heavy, rhythmic snoring through the audio feed, I crept silently into his home office. The door was unlocked. His massive ego made him incredibly careless. He had left his laptop sitting right on his desk. I pulled a specialized encrypted flash drive from my pocket, inserted it into the port, and initiated the data extraction program Mr. Harrington had provided. Within minutes, I was downloading his entire digital life: spreadsheets, bank statements, encrypted emails, and private financial ledgers. I pulled the drive out, erased my digital footprint, and slipped back down to the living room sofa like a shadow. Sitting in the pitch-black room illuminated only by the glow of my own laptop screen, I began to analyze the data. As a professional appraiser, I was highly trained to spot discrepancies and hidden values. It did not take me long to unravel the massive web of lies Bradley had constructed. Bradley was not the brilliant real estate mogul he pretended to be. He was drowning in an ocean of toxic debt. The Oak Ridge project was a colossal multi-million-dollar luxury commercial development that was completely underwater. He was highly leveraged, borrowing exorbitant amounts of money from private lenders against assets he did not even own yet. He was moving millions of dollars illegally between various shell companies to artificially inflate his net worth and secure even more loans. It was a massive financial house of cards waiting for the slightest breeze to collapse. But the most sickening part was buried deep in a folder labeled Personal Assets. I clicked open a series of scanned PDF documents and felt my blood run ice cold. Bradley had systematically forged my signature on multiple preliminary loan applications to secure high-interest financing. He was illegally leveraging my pristine credit score and my appraisal firm's revenue to save his failing empire. He was willing to destroy my financial future and send me to federal prison just to keep his fraudulent project afloat. I closed the laptop, a cold, dangerous smile forming on my lips in the dark. I spent the next 2 hours meticulously organizing the stolen files into encrypted folders, ensuring Mr. Harrington's team would have immediate access to the raw data by morning. I read through aggressive emails from desperate investors demanding their returns. I saw frantic messages from construction foremen threatening to walk off the Oak Ridge job site because they had not been paid in 6 weeks. Bradley was playing a highly dangerous game of financial roulette, using stolen funds from one investor to temporarily placate another. It was a textbook Ponzi scheme wrapped in a glossy real estate facade. He thought his fake vasectomy and his staged outrage over my pregnancy were his ultimate masterstrokes. He believed that breaking me emotionally would guarantee my absolute silence and compliance. He wanted me so consumed by the shame of a fake affair that I would sign away my home and my business without asking a single question. I laid my head back against the sofa cushions and stared at the dark ceiling. The baby growing inside me was his. A biological fact he could never erase no matter how many fraudulent medical documents he shoved in my face. He had discarded his own child just to clear his path to Madison and her lucrative real estate connections. He was banking on my parents to crush my spirit, knowing they favored my sister above everything else. But they had all severely miscalculated. They assumed I was just a quiet, submissive appraiser who spent her days dusting off old paintings and authenticating vintage jewelry. They failed to realize that my entire career was built on spotting frauds, exposing forgeries, and calculating the true hidden value of things people overlooked. Bradley had handed me the blueprint to his own destruction. The psychological game had officially begun, and I was already holding the winning hand. The very next morning, my phone buzzed with a relentless, aggressive urgency. It was my mother. I answered, making sure to clear my throat so my voice sounded appropriately weak and raspy. She did not ask how I had slept on the living room sofa. She did not care if I had eaten or if the stress was affecting my pregnancy. She had a single, rigid demand. I was to attend Madison's 30th birthday dinner that evening at the Ocean Air, one of the most exclusive seafood restaurants in the downtown district. You will show up, Clara, and you will apologize to Bradley and the rest of the family for the shameful, disgusting stress you have caused us all. Patricia snapped her voice, leaving absolutely no room for debate. Jamal flew in from New York late last night just for this dinner. You will not ruin your sister's milestone with your selfish, delusional drama. Put on a decent dress, hide that stomach of yours, and show some genuine remorse. She hung up before I could reply. I stared at the blank screen of my phone, a cold smile forming on my lips. Jamal, Madison's husband. He was a senior forensic accountant for a top-tier corporate firm. Jamal was a brilliant, composed African-American man who commanded absolute respect in every room he entered. He traveled constantly for high-stakes corporate audits, which had clearly given Madison the perfect unsupervised cover to play house with my husband. I walked over to the closet Bradley had allowed me limited access to. I chose a shapeless, understated gray dress. I needed to look exactly like the broken, defeated, humiliated woman they all expected to see. I brushed a pale powder over my cheeks to make myself look exhausted and skipped the mascara. But beneath the drab fabric of my dress, securely taped directly to my bra strap, was a tiny high-definition audio recorder provided by Mr. Harrington. I was walking straight into the lion's den, but I was the one bringing the trap. When I arrived at the restaurant, the hostess escorted me to a lavish private dining room at the back. The heavy mahogany doors opened to reveal a scene of sickening opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over a long table covered in white linen, fresh orchids, and expensive champagne flutes. Bradley was sitting directly across from Madison. He looked up when I entered, his eyes narrowing with disgust, before he quickly masked it with a look of long-suffering patience. Madison sat in the center seat, dripping in diamond jewelry that I now highly suspected was purchased with stolen investment funds. She looked radiant, victorious, and completely untouchable. And sitting quietly next to her was Jamal. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, sipping a glass of sparkling water. His posture was relaxed, but his sharp, intelligent eyes missed absolutely nothing. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence," my father Richard muttered, as I took the only empty seat at the far end of the table as far away from the birthday girl as possible. I kept my head down staring at the pristine white tablecloth. I mumbled a quiet apology for being late, playing my pathetic role flawlessly. Throughout the appetizers, the family completely ignored me. They laughed, drank expensive vintage wine, and showered Madison with lavish gifts. Bradley played the role of the wounded saint, perfectly accepting sympathetic pats on the shoulder from my parents. But as the main courses were cleared, the psychological torture truly began. Madison tapped her silver fork against her crystal champagne flute. The bright ringing sound cut through the chatter. She stood up, smoothing down her designer silk dress, and raised her glass. "I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate my 30th birthday." Madison began, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Family is the most important thing in the world to me. Trust, loyalty, and unwavering support are the pillars that hold us together." She paused, her eyes locking directly onto mine from across the long table. The smile on her face turned utterly venomous. "It is a tragedy that not everyone respects the sacred sanctity of marriage," she said loudly, ensuring her voice carried perfectly to the audio recorder hidden against my chest. "It breaks my heart to see someone as generous and hardworking as Bradley suffer such a vile betrayal. To invite another man into your bed to carry a child of deceit, it is a sickness. But we are here for you, Bradley. We will always protect you from toxic people." My mother raised her glass immediately. "Hear, hear. Thank God Bradley is strong enough to cut the cancer out of his life." I looked down at my hands, my shoulders shaking slightly. To them, it looked like I was weeping from the crushing public humiliation. In reality, I was biting the inside of my cheek hard enough to draw blood just to stop myself from laughing out loud at their monumental stupidity. Madison had just explicitly publicly confessed her allegiance to Bradley on tape. While my sister continued her fake, self-righteous speech, I shifted my gaze slightly down the table. I watched Jamal. Jamal was not looking at Madison. He was looking at Bradley. The forensic accountant was sitting perfectly still, his analytical mind processing the microscopic details of the room. Underneath the clear glass table, I saw a sudden, subtle movement. Bradley casually shifted his leg, and the tip of his expensive leather shoe brushed gently, intimately against Madison's ankle. Madison did not flinch. She did not pull away. She just kept smiling and giving her speech. Jamal saw it. His jaw tightened just a fraction of an inch, a microscopic shift that betrayed the violent storm brewing behind his calm exterior. He looked down at his lap. Resting on his knees was a thick manila financial folder he had been quietly reviewing before the toasts began. He closed the folder with slow, deliberate precision and slid it seamlessly into the leather briefcase resting by his chair. The dinner finally dragged to an end. As the waiters brought out the birthday cake, I stood up abruptly, knocking my chair back. I covered my mouth, acting as though the public shaming had finally broken me, and practically ran out of the private dining room. I hurried down the dim, quiet hallway lined with heavy oak doors and vintage nautical maps. The heavy bass of the restaurant's jazz music muffled my quick footsteps. I slipped into a small, secluded alcove near the restrooms, leaning against the cool wallpaper to catch my breath. A shadow fell over me. I gasped, ready to defend myself, but looked up to see a towering figure in a navy suit. It was Jamal. His expression was entirely unreadable, his dark eyes studying me with a terrifying, piercing intensity. He stepped into the alcove, completely blocking me from the view of the main hallway. "You play the victim very well, Clara," Jamal said, his voice a low, smooth baritone that barely carried over the background music. "But I see the way your eyes move. You are not broken. You are calculating." I stiffened, my heart hammering against my ribs. I did not know how much he knew or whose side he was truly on. Before I could formulate a safe lie, Jamal reached into his tailored jacket pocket. He pulled out a sleek silver USB drive. He reached forward, pressed the cold metal into the palm of my hand, and folded my trembling fingers tightly over it. "You are not the only one being played for an absolute fool in this family," Jamal whispered, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy frequency. "I know about the hotel rooms, I know about the secret texts, but more importantly, I know where the money is going. Bradley forged your signature to illegally leverage your firm's assets, and he is aggressively siphoning my personal investment funds to launder money for his failing Oak Ridge project." I stared up at him in absolute shock. The brilliant accountant had already unraveled the financial web. This drive contains the encrypted offshore routing numbers and the fake vendor invoices he used to steal from us. Jamal continued, his dark eyes burning with a cold, calculated fury. "He thinks because I travel, I am blind. He thinks because you are pregnant, you are weak." Jamal stepped back, casually adjusting his silver cufflinks with perfect, unbothered composure. He looked back toward the hallway leading to the private dining room. "Take the drive to your lawyer," Clara, Jamal said softly, a ruthless smile finally breaking through his calm facade. "Let us burn their entire world to the ground." I walked out of the restaurant with Jamal's words echoing in my mind. The tension in the private dining room was thick enough to choke on as Madison stood up, her hand resting delicately on her flat stomach. The champagne flutes stopped clinking. My parents were already beaming, their eyes fixed on Madison with a terrifying cult-like adoration. "I am absolutely thrilled to finally share some joyous news," Madison announced, her voice pitched to ensure every corner of the room heard her. "Jamal and I are expecting our first baby." My mother let out a high-pitched shriek of delight, practically leaping across the table to pull Madison into a suffocating embrace. "It is a miracle," she cried, wiping away tears that looked far too rehearsed. "The family legacy continues, a proper, legitimate heir." She turned her head, casting a sharp, cutting glare at me. "Unlike some people in this family who flaunt their loose morals and carry children that are nothing but a stain on our reputation, Madison is building a future. Clara, try to look at your sister and learn something about honor. Maybe you will realize why Bradley had to leave you before you destroyed him completely." I sat perfectly still, my fingers curled tightly around the stem of my wine glass. I felt the audio recorder against my chest, a silent witness to their calculated cruelty. I watched Bradley. He was sitting at the end of the table, his face a mask of stone-cold neutrality. He did not look surprised. He did not look happy. He just stared at the table, his knuckles white as he gripped his napkin. Jamal, however, remained the most fascinating variable in the room. He stood up, picked up his own glass, and raised it toward Madison with a slow, graceful motion. "To the baby," Jamal said, his voice as smooth as velvet. "May he or she be as smart and ambitious as the mother." He took a long, slow sip, his eyes never leaving Madison's face. I noticed his left hand disappear beneath the table for a split second. When he brought it back up, he held his glass with his right. I looked down at the spot where he had been sitting. His water glass was sitting near the edge, half empty. He had deliberately kept it away from the table's centerpiece, making it easy to palm. I understood immediately. He had the sample, he had the truth. The rest of the dinner was a blur of aggressive praise for Madison's miraculous condition and increasingly venomous side eyes aimed at my pregnancy. My father leaned into me, his voice a low, gravelly whisper. "Do you see what you gave up, Clara? You could have been the one being celebrated. Instead, you are the pariah. Sign the final documents for the appraisal firm tomorrow, or I will personally ensure the judge in the divorce proceedings knows exactly how unstable you are." I looked at my father, my eyes wide and watery, acting the role of the terrified, cornered wife. I nodded slowly, promising to sign. I knew he was just another pawn in Bradley's game, another person who believed the lie. I left the restaurant as soon as the dessert was served, claiming I was feeling ill from the stress. I didn't head home. I headed straight for the small, sterile lab office Jamal had set up for his firm's private investigative work. I arrived 10 minutes before Jamal. The office was quiet save for the hum of an industrial centrifuge. When Jamal finally entered, he did not speak. He moved directly to the lab bench, his movements precise and efficient. He placed a small plastic vial on the table. "I got it," he said, his voice tight. I swabbed the rim of her water glass after she drank. The lab technician is running a rush sequencing now. I handed him my encrypted phone. I told him about the guarantor agreement I had discovered, the one involving my parents, and the massive forged equity loan. Jamal's eyes flared with a new dark intensity. "He is not just a thief, Clara. He is a predator. He is using your family as a safety net while he burns your life to the ground." We waited in the silence for 2 hours. Every minute felt like a lifetime. The only sound was the rhythmic ticking of the wall clock and the distant sirens of the city. Then the computer screen flickered. A notification chime rang out. The data was ready. Jamal clicked the mouse. The results window opened, scrolling down to the comparison summary. We looked at the screen together. The confirmation was absolute. The DNA markers from the sample taken from Madison's glass were a perfect, irrefutable match for Bradley. The baby was not Jamal's. It was Bradley's. I felt a roar of static in my ears, but I forced myself to focus on the next document in the folder. It was a digital scan of Bradley's medical file that Mr. Harrington's private investigator had finally intercepted from the private clinic where he had supposedly undergone his vasectomy. I clicked open the PDF. My heart stopped. The certificate he had shown me, the one that proved he was sterile, and therefore could not be the father of my child, was an absolute fabrication. It was a high-quality printout of a template sold on the dark web, complete with a forged doctor's signature and a fake clinic seal. The reality of the situation hit me with the force of a wrecking ball. Bradley had staged his own infertility. He had shown me that fake document specifically so I would question my own pregnancy, so I would feel the crushing shame of a scandalous affair, and so I would be desperate enough to hand over my house equity and my firm's shares to save him. He was not just gaslighting me, he had orchestrated a multi-layered financial and emotional coup. He was stealing my life, my assets, and my future, using my own family as his muscle. He had convinced them that I was a disgraced, cheating wife who had lost her mind, all while he was living a double life with my sister, expecting their own child. The heavy oak door of my vintage appraisal office clicked shut, sealing us inside. The space smelled of aged, paper-polished wood and oil paint, a sanctuary where I spent my days determining the true value of things people left behind. Tonight, however, we were evaluating a different kind of artifact. We were examining the absolute wreckage of our marriages. Jamal set his sleek leather briefcase on my massive drafting table. He did not say a word as he unbuttoned his suit jacket and pulled out a thick stack of manila folders alongside his silver laptop. The glow from my antique brass desk lamp cast long shadows across his face. He looked exhausted, but his eyes possessed a razor-sharp clarity. He was a senior forensic accountant, a man trained to find the invisible threads of stolen money hidden in labyrinths of corporate lies. I was an appraiser trained to spot the microscopic flaws in a master forgery. Together, we were the exact nightmare Bradley and Madison never saw coming. I booted up my computer and inserted the silver USB drive Jamal had pressed into my hand at the restaurant. A dozen encrypted folders popped up on the screen. Jamal leaned over the table, his large hands resting flat against the wood. "Bradley thinks he is a mastermind," Jamal began, his deep voice filling the quiet room. "He assumes that because he uses complex corporate structures, nobody will bother to peel back the layers. But fraud always leaves a paper trail, Clara. Always." He tapped the screen, opening a spreadsheet filled with hundreds of transactions, offshore routing numbers, and shell company registrations. I stared at the dizzying array of numbers. Jamal guided my eyes to a specific column highlighted in stark red. "This is Oak Ridge," Jamal explained. "The luxury commercial development Bradley claims is his crowning achievement. He has been selling a dream to private investors, promising them astronomical returns. But the project is bleeding cash. He cannot secure traditional bank loans anymore because his debt-to-income ratio is toxic. So he had to find alternative sources of funding to keep the construction crews from walking off the site." He looked at me, his dark eyes locking onto mine with a heavy, sorrowful weight. I braced myself, knowing the next blow was going to be severe. "He used you, Clara," Jamal said softly. Jamal pulled a physical document from his folder and slid it across my desk. It was a copy of a massive home equity loan agreement. I looked at the property address. It was the custom-built house I had shared with Bradley, the house he had literally thrown me out of. The loan was for an astronomical amount leveraged against the total equity we had built over the years. I scrolled down to the bottom of the second page. There, next to Bradley's aggressive scrawl, was my signature. My stomach violently twisted. I reached for my brass magnifying loupe, a tool I used every single day to authenticate signatures on 19th century letters and historical documents. I leaned in close, hovering the magnifying lens over the copied ink. It was a forgery, and it was an insulting, sloppy one at that. "Look at the pressure points," I said, my voice eerily calm as I pointed through the glass. "The upward stroke on the capital C is completely wrong. I write with a fluid motion, but this line is jagged." The person who signed this hesitated. They lifted the pen right here at the curve of the A. Bradley did not even try to make it look convincing. He just scribbled it in a panic because he needed the cash immediately. Jamal nodded grimly. He bypassed the standard notary requirements by using a corrupt loan officer in his pocket. The bank pushed the paperwork through without ever verifying your identity in person. He drained the entire equity of your home and funneled every single penny directly into the Oak Ridge accounts. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. If Oak Ridge failed, the bank would foreclose on the house. Bradley had secretly chained me to a sinking ship, ensuring that if he went down, my financial ruin would guarantee his survival. But the horror did not stop there. Jamal pulled another piece of paper from his briefcase. This one was a guarantor agreement. Bradley needed co-signers to secure the final approval for the equity extraction, Jamal said, his voice dropping into a harsh, tight whisper. His credit was already stretched to the absolute limit. He needed someone with pristine assets to vouch for the loan. I stared at the guarantor signatures. My breath hitched in my throat, choking me. The room suddenly felt completely devoid of oxygen. Richard and Patricia, my parents. They knew. I gasped, my hands shaking violently as I gripped the edge of the drafting table. They co-signed the fraudulent loan. They knew Bradley was stealing my house. Jamal closed his eyes for a brief second before pulling out the final, most devastating piece of evidence. He laid a printed credit card statement on top of the forged loan. "It gets worse, Clara." Bradley did not just use the stolen equity to fund his construction project. He needed to buy their silence. He needed to reward them for their complicity. I looked at the highlighted charges on the statement. They were routed through one of Bradley's shell accounts, but the purchases were undeniable. Massive transactions at luxury boutiques, first-class airline tickets to Paris, and a breathtaking $50,000 charge at an elite downtown jeweler. I stared at the jeweler's receipt. My mind flashed back to the restaurant just a few hours ago. I saw Madison sitting at the center of the table, bathed in the glow of the crystal chandeliers. I saw the massive, flawless diamond necklace resting against her collarbone. The necklace my mother had proudly announced was a gift from Bradley to celebrate her milestone birthday. My own parents had facilitated the theft of my home equity, watched my husband funnel the stolen cash into their accounts, and used my money to buy my sister diamonds. They had looked me right in the eye, slapped my face, and called me a disgrace, all while wearing the spoils of my financial ruin. They did not just throw me out into the rain. They had actively, maliciously robbed me to fund the golden child's lavish lifestyle. A profound, terrifying silence fell over the appraisal office. The tears that had threatened to fall completely evaporated. The betrayal was so absolute, so grotesquely evil, that it bypassed my grief entirely and ignited a core of pure, unadulterated rage. Jamal watched me carefully. He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for the pregnant, discarded wife to collapse under the weight of her family's monstrous cruelty. Instead, I reached across the table and neatly stacked the documents into a perfect uniform pile. I aligned the edges with mechanical precision. "You said Bradley is desperate for mezzanine debt," I stated, my voice ringing with a cold, metallic authority that I hardly recognized as my own. You said he is begging private lenders to float his bridge loans because the banks will not touch Oak Ridge anymore. Jamal narrowed his eyes, catching the dangerous shift in my demeanor. Yes. He has a primary note coming due in exactly 48 hours. If he does not secure $20 million to satisfy the original creditors, they will seize the entire Oak Ridge development. He will lose everything. The land, the permits, the investors. He will be bankrupt and facing federal indictment for the missing funds. I picked up my cell phone. I looked at the time. It was past midnight, but I knew Mr. Harrington would be awake. Billionaire fixers never slept. I am going to buy his debt, I said, looking directly into Jamal's eyes. Jamal blinked, his calm facade finally cracking in genuine shock. Clara, what are you talking about? That is a $20 million institutional note. I did not explain the $88 million sitting in my private trust. I did not explain Leo or the Ghost LLC Mr. Harrington had already set up for me specifically for this purpose. I just smiled, a vicious, predatory smile that matched the darkness in the room. Bradley thinks he controls the board because he stole my pieces, I told Jamal, dialing the lawyer's direct private line. But he does not realize I just bought the entire casino. The line clicked open on the first ring. Mr. Harrington answered with his usual crisp efficiency. Mr. Harrington, I said, never breaking eye contact with Jamal. I want you to activate the LLC immediately. Contact the primary creditors for the Oak Ridge development. Tell them an anonymous private equity firm is willing to purchase Bradley's entire debt portfolio tonight in cash at a premium. There was a brief, satisfied pause on the other end of the line. Consider it done, Clara, the lawyer replied. You will officially own him by sunrise. I hung up the phone and set it gently on the table. Jamal was staring at me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. The quiet, submissive appraiser was dead. I was going to become my husband's landlord, his master, and his ultimate executioner. I was going to wrap the chains of his own fraudulent debt around his neck and pull until he suffocated. We have 48 hours until his payment is due. I told Jamal, picking up the forged deed. Let us prepare the gala. I want to look my parents in the eye when I take their house. The pale morning sun was just beginning to cut through the thick Chicago fog when I returned to the house. I had barely slept, fueled entirely by the adrenaline of Jamal's revelations and the silent execution of my counteroffensive. As I unlocked the front door, I immediately noticed the absolute chaos in the living room. Bradley was pacing aggressively across the Persian rug. His usually immaculate hair was disheveled, his expensive tie hanging loosely around his neck. He looked up as I walked in, his eyes bloodshot. He was putting on a masterclass performance of a desperate, broken man. We have a massive problem, Clara, he said, his voice trembling with manufactured panic. The Oak Ridge development is hemorrhaging money. The supply chain issues just bankrupted my primary contractor. I am facing total financial ruin by the end of the week. I stood near the entryway, keeping my face perfectly blank. I knew exactly why he was panicking. Mr. Harrington had successfully purchased his mezzanine debt overnight, and the anonymous collection notices were likely hitting Bradley's inbox right now. He had no idea I was the one holding the noose. I do not see how your business failures are my concern, I replied quietly, playing the part of the battered, exhausted wife. You threw me out, remember? Bradley closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. He grabbed my shoulders, gripping them tight enough to bruise. He forced a look of pleading desperation onto his face. You do not understand, he hissed. If I go down, we all go down. Your parents co-signed a massive equity loan on this house. If I default on Oak Ridge, the bank will seize this property, and they will go after Richard and Patricia for the remainder. They will lose everything they have worked for. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to spit in his face. He was using my parents as leverage, completely unaware that I already knew they had stolen my equity to fund Madison's diamond obsession. What do you want from me, Bradley? I asked, letting a tremor of fear slip into my voice. You already took the joint accounts. I need a bridge loan, he said quickly, his eyes darting around the room. A private lender is willing to advance me $5 million to save the project. But I am over-leveraged. I need additional collateral. I need you to sign over your 30% equity share in your appraisal firm. I stared at him in feigned shock. My firm, I built that business from the ground up. It is the only thing I have left. His pleading facade instantly vanished, replaced by the cold, ruthless predator I now knew him to be. He let go of my shoulders and took a step back, crossing his arms. "You are going to sign the transfer papers today, Clara," he commanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy threat. "Or I will file the divorce papers tomorrow morning. I will publicly name you as an adulterer. I will drag your pristine business reputation through the mud. Who is going to hire an appraiser known for lying and cheating? I will make sure you are radioactive in this city. You will lose the firm anyway, but this way you save your parents from homelessness." He held out a thick stack of legal documents. On top was the equity transfer agreement for my 30% stake. Right beneath it was a massive collateral asset portfolio declaration. "You are going to officially appraise the art and antique collection in this house," Bradley dictated, tapping the heavy paper. "You will validate them at top market value and bundle them with your firm's shares as collateral for the bank. Do it now." I let out a broken, defeated sob. I lowered my head, hiding the absolute triumph blazing in my eyes. I took the pen from his hand with shaking fingers. "Fine," I whispered, letting a tear fall onto the mahogany table. "I will do it. Just please do not ruin my business." Bradley smirked, a sickening expression of total victory. He patted my cheek condescendingly. "Good girl. I knew you would see reason. Have the appraisal portfolio ready by noon. I have a meeting with the loan officers at Chase Bank at 1 o'clock. He turned and walked into the kitchen to pour himself a coffee, completely convinced he had just secured his salvation. He had no idea he had just handed me the keys to his federal indictment. I took the paperwork into my home office and locked the door. As a top-tier art and vintage appraiser, I had access to a vast, highly specialized network. Over the years, I had acquired a unique collection of museum-quality replicas. These were not cheap knockoffs. They were masterfully crafted props used in high-budget historical films and television shows. To the untrained eye, a replica 19th-century French mantel clock looked exactly like the authentic $200,000 original. But the law regarding replicas is incredibly strict. Every single fake piece is required to have a microscopic, nearly invisible laser etching, identifying it as a cinematic reproduction, completely rendering its financial value to zero. Bradley thought the house was filled with millions of dollars of authentic antiques. He had never paid attention to my work. He did not know that a month ago, anticipating a potential burglary from his shady associates, I had moved all the genuine high-value pieces to a secure, climate-controlled vault downtown. The house was currently furnished entirely with my legal replicas. I pulled up the bank's collateral declaration form. I meticulously listed every single item in the house. The Louis XIV armchairs, the vintage Cartier display clocks, the 17th century oil paintings. I typed out the descriptions with absolute precision, but in the fine print buried in the dense technical appraisal coding that no arrogant real estate developer would ever bother to read, I accurately classified every single item as a cinematic replica with zero market value. I assigned the correct industry codes that explicitly stated these items were not authentic. I signed my name at the bottom, stamping it with my official federally recognized appraiser's seal. By signing this document, I was legally protected. I had accurately and lawfully appraised the items as worthless fakes. But Bradley was taking this portfolio to a federally insured bank and presenting it as multi-million-dollar collateral to secure a massive loan. In the eyes of the United States federal government, under Title 18 of the United States Code, passing off worthless assets to secure a bank loan is not just a mistake. It is wire fraud. It is bank fraud. It is a Class A felony carrying a mandatory minimum sentence in a federal penitentiary. I printed the thick stack of documents, placed them neatly into a crisp manila folder, and walked back into the living room. Bradley was waiting by the front door, wearing a sharp-tailored suit, looking every bit the wealthy, invincible mogul. I handed him the folder, keeping my eyes fixed on the floor. "It is done," I said softly. "Everything in the house is listed. My 30% share transfer is signed. Bradley snatched the folder from my hands without even glancing at the pages. He shoved it into his leather briefcase and checked his expensive watch. He let out a loud, arrogant laugh, his arrogance blinding him to his own demise. "You should have just been a good, obedient wife from the start, Clara," he mocked, opening the front door. "Now I have to go save this family from your spectacular failures. Do not wait up." He strode out to his Range Rover, the ultimate picture of unearned confidence. I stood in the doorway watching his car disappear down the pristine suburban street. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. Bradley was driving straight to a federally insured financial institution. He was about to confidently slide that folder across a loan officer's desk. He was about to unknowingly submit indisputable, legally binding evidence of massive financial fraud. The trap was set, the bait was taken, and the steel jaws were about to snap shut. My phone vibrated. It was a push notification from Mr. Harrington's firm. The anonymous LLC had officially finalized the purchase of Bradley's mezzanine debt. He was now legally and bindingly in our debt. I looked at Jamal. He was staring at the screen, his expression a mix of profound betrayal and cold, hardened resolve. "He lied to you about the vasectomy so he could manipulate your entire reality," Jamal said, his voice barely audible. "And he lied to me about the fatherhood of this child so he could keep his assets shielded within a family structure he thought he controlled. He treated us both like chess pieces." I picked up the silver USB drive and dropped it into my purse. "He wants me to sign the final transfer of my appraisal firm tomorrow," I said, my voice steady, devoid of all fear. "I will sign it, but I will do it with the full weight of the evidence we have now." "Bradley wanted a war," I whispered, stepping toward the door. "I am going to make sure he loses everything he ever loved, starting with the house he stole from me." The morning after my confrontation with Jamal, I arrived at my appraisal firm before the sun had fully risen. My mind was vibrating with the singular lethal focus of a predator tracking its prey. The quiet elegance of my gallery, with its heavy velvet drapes and temperature-controlled display cases, usually brought me peace. Today, it was merely a staging ground. Jamal had sent me the final digital confirmation at 4 a.m. The anonymous LLC, controlled entirely by Mr. Harrington and funded by my hidden $88 million inheritance, now officially owned the mezzanine debt for Bradley's Oak Ridge project. I held the leash. I just needed Bradley to willingly put his head in the noose. The heavy brass chime above the gallery door shattered the morning silence. I looked up from my mahogany desk, expecting a scheduled client. Instead, my parents marched into the foyer. Patricia and Richard did not walk like people visiting their daughter. They marched like debt collectors arriving for a brutal eviction. My mother wore a severe Chanel suit, her lips pressed into a thin, furious line. My father flanked her, his jaw set hard, clutching a dark leather portfolio. They bypassed my assistant, completely pushing open the glass doors to my private office and slamming them shut. I stood up, keeping my face perfectly blank. "What is going on?" I asked, injecting just enough hesitation into my voice to play the intimidated daughter. "We are done playing games with you, Clara," my father barked, tossing the portfolio onto my desk. It landed with a heavy, threatening thud. "Bradley called us this morning. He told us you are stalling on the final asset transfers. He told us you are trying to sabotage the Oak Ridge development out of sheer petty spite." My mother stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with absolute disgust. "Your sister is pregnant, Clara. She is carrying the future of this family, and Bradley is working himself to the bone to provide for her. Oak Ridge needs a final injection of liquid capital today to clear the permit holds. Bradley is tapped out. We are tapped out helping him. You are going to liquidate your retirement accounts right now." I stared at them, letting the sheer audacity of their demand wash over me. They knew Bradley had forged my signature to steal my home equity. They had co-signed that very loan. Now they were standing in my office demanding the absolute last penny to my name, to fund my husband's new life with my sister. "My retirement," I asked, letting my voice tremble perfectly. "You want me to empty my 401k for a project that has nothing to do with me?" I have a baby coming too. How am I supposed to survive? My father slammed his fist against my desk, rattling my antique appraisal tools. You are carrying a bastard child from some random affair. He roared, his face turning a violent shade of crimson. Do not you dare compare your disgraceful situation to Madison. Bradley is giving her a legitimate, respectable life. The least you can do after destroying his marriage is help him secure his business. I shook my head, taking a step back, playing the terrified victim to the hilt. I cannot do that. It is all the money I have left. I will not give it to Bradley. The air in the office turned instantly toxic. My mother let out a sharp, cruel laugh. She walked right up to me, invading my personal space, her expensive perfume suffocating me. You are deeply, severely mentally ill, Clara. Patricia hissed, her voice dripping with venom. We have spoken to Dr. Evans. We have told him about your delusions, your erratic behavior, your ridiculous claims about Bradley. If you do not write this check today, we are going to file for an involuntary psychiatric hold. We will tell every client, every gallery owner, and every auction house in this city that Clara Wilson has lost her mind. Your business will be dead by Friday. My father nodded, crossing his arms over his chest. And we are cutting you off completely. You will be dead to us. No family, no inheritance, no support. You will be a crazy, destitute single mother living on the streets. Write the check for Oak Ridge, or we walk out that door and you cease to exist. To emphasize her absolute contempt, my mother turned her head and spat directly onto the polished hardwood floor right next to my shoes. The disrespect was visceral. It was a physical manifestation of 30 years of emotional abuse. They were ready to throw me into a psychiatric ward just to secure funding for Madison's lavish lifestyle. I looked down at the floor, then back up at their furious, demanding faces. I forced my breathing to become shallow and ragged. I let my shoulders collapse. I brought my hands up to my face and forced a violent, shaking sob from my chest. Please, I cried, letting the tears fall freely down my cheeks. Please do not do this. Please do not cut me off. I have nobody else. I will do it. I will give you the money. Just please do not tell everyone I am crazy. My mother's face instantly smoothed into a mask of smug, victorious satisfaction. She practically glowed with the thrill of breaking me. I knew you would finally see reason, Patricia said, stepping back and smoothing her skirt. Stop crying, Clara. It makes you look pathetic. Get your checkbook. Bradley needs $100,000 to satisfy the permit board by noon. I kept my head bowed, sniffing loudly as I walked around my desk. I opened the bottom drawer and bypassed my personal banking ledger. Instead, I reached for a very specific heavy black binder that Mr. Harrington had sent via secure courier early this morning. It was the operating ledger for Apex Holdings LLC, the ghost company I now controlled. I pulled out a crisp, elongated commercial check. My hands shook, but not from fear. I was trembling with the absolute intoxicating thrill of the kill. I grabbed a pen and quickly filled out the amount, $100,000, payable directly to Bradley's primary Oak Ridge operating account. But this was not a simple personal check. As Mr. Harrington had meticulously explained, this specific financial instrument was a commercial bridging draft. It was deeply coded with legal stipulations printed in microscopic text along the endorsement line on the back. By signing and depositing this specific draft, the recipient legally agreed to the terms of a predatory high-yield mezzanine loan. It carried a catastrophic compounding interest rate, and most importantly, it listed Bradley's remaining personal assets as direct collateral. I signed my name on the authorization line, my signature perfectly matching the registered agent profile of Apex Holdings, LLC. I ripped the check from the binder and handed it to my father. My hand was visibly shaking as I offered it to him. Here, I whispered, wiping my wet cheeks. Tell Bradley it is for Oak Ridge. Please tell him to leave my firm alone. My father snatched the check from my fingers. He barely glanced at the complex routing numbers or the heavy commercial formatting. He only saw the bold $100,000 printed across the front. He folded it sharply and shoved it into his jacket pocket. You did the right thing for the family, Clara, my father said, his tone entirely devoid of warmth. Try to get yourself together. You look like a mess. My mother did not even say goodbye. She simply turned on her heel and marched out of my office, my father trailing right behind her. The glass doors swung shut, sealing the quiet back into my gallery. I stood completely frozen for a full minute, listening to the sound of their car engine starting in the parking lot and fading away down the street. As soon as the silence settled, my tears stopped instantly. My posture straightened. I reached over to my desk and grabbed a sanitized wipe to clean the spot on the floor where my mother had spat. I tossed the wipe into the trash can with a feeling of absolute disgust. I walked over to the large floor-to-ceiling window overlooking the street. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. I was no longer the frightened, discarded wife. I was the architect of their destruction. My parents were driving straight to Bradley's office right now. They were going to hand him that check, expecting him to celebrate their masterful manipulation. Bradley, desperate for cash and blinded by his own towering ego, would take that commercial draft and rush it straight to the bank. He would flip it over, sign his name on the endorsement line, and hand it to the teller. And the absolute second that ink dried and the funds cleared his account, he would trigger the legal trap. He would officially bind himself to a catastrophic financial contract with Apex Holdings LLC. He would unknowingly sign away the rights to his cars, his remaining bank accounts, and his future earnings, handing them directly over to me. He thought he was bleeding me dry. He thought he was using my parents to extract the very last drop of my security, but he was actually swallowing the poison pill I had hand-fed him. I picked up my phone and dialed Jamal's secure number. He answered immediately. They took the bait, I said, my voice echoing with cold, hard certainty. The bridge draft is in transit. Bradley will deposit it within the hour. Excellent, Jamal replied, his deep voice vibrating with dark satisfaction. The moment that check clears, Oak Ridge becomes a subsidiary of your LLC. The forensic audit is fully prepared. As soon as you give the signal, I will flag the fraudulent transfers to the Federal Banking Commission. Do not flag it yet, I instructed, watching the morning traffic roll past my window. Let him spend the weekend believing he has won. Let my sister celebrate her stolen victory. I want them at the absolute peak of their arrogance when the floor gives out. I hung up the phone and walked back to my desk. The war had officially shifted from defense to offense. They had stolen my past, but I was about to completely own their future. Monday morning arrived with the clinical precision of a surgical strike. I sat in Jamal's office, watching the dual monitors on his desk. The banking terminal glowed with a bright green confirmation status. Bradley had deposited the $100,000 bridging draft at exactly 9:15 on Friday morning. The waiting period was officially over. The funds had cleared. By signing and depositing that specific commercial draft into his primary operating account, Bradley had not just accepted a temporary cash injection. He had legally bound himself to the catastrophic mezzanine loan terms set by Apex Holdings LLC. The microscopic text he had ignored in his arrogant rush was a financial death warrant. He had unknowingly pledged his remaining personal wealth, his luxury vehicles, his frozen accounts, and his entire controlling stake in the Oak Ridge development as collateral. He had handed me the master key to his entire existence. Now it was time to pull the trigger. Execute the demand, I said, leaning back in my chair. Jamal hit the enter key. An automated, irrefutable notice of default fired directly from Apex Holdings into Bradley's corporate inbox, simultaneously copying his legal team and his primary investors. The terms were explicitly outlined and brutally uncompromising. Due to cross-default clauses triggered by his heavily leveraged and fraudulently obtained loans, the entire debt structure was instantly called in. Bradley had exactly 48 hours to produce $20 million in liquid cash. If he failed by a single minute, Apex Holdings would initiate immediate foreclosure, seizing the Oak Ridge development and liquidating absolutely everything he owned. Within minutes, Jamal's intercepted feed of Bradley's office network erupted into total chaos. We sat in silence, listening to the audio feed as Bradley lost his mind. He shattered something heavy against his office wall, screaming at his lead attorney. He demanded to know how a ghost LLC had swallowed his debt overnight. He screamed that it was impossible, that the $100,000 check from my parents was supposed to save him, not trigger a financial guillotine. His lawyer's panicked, trembling voice confirmed the nightmare. The endorsement was legally binding. Bradley had signed away his empire. Madison's shrill voice soon pierced the audio feed. She had rushed to his office, terrified that her newly secured billionaire lifestyle was evaporating before it even began. I listened to her sobbing hysterically, demanding Bradley fix the situation immediately. She reminded him she was carrying his heir, completely unaware that the empire she thought she was inheriting was currently owned by her despised older sister. "We have to host an emergency showcase," Bradley barked, his voice ragged and breathless with sheer terror. "A gala. Tomorrow night at the Oak Ridge Model Estate. We invite every heavy hitter, every private equity firm, every hedge fund manager in Chicago. We present the project as an exclusive equity buy-in. We beg them for the $20 million. It is the only way to satisfy this phantom lender before the deadline." For the next 24 hours, they moved with the frantic, uncoordinated energy of cornered prey. Caterers were bribed with exorbitant rush fees. The city's elite were sent digital invitations wrapped in desperate, flowery language that framed the event as an exclusive investment opportunity rather than a beggar's plea for a lifeline. They hired florists to drape the model home in imported orchids and brought in a string quartet to mask the scent of impending bankruptcy. My parents, entirely oblivious to the reality that they had physically handed Bradley the instrument of his destruction, threw themselves into organizing the gala with sickening enthusiasm. My father called his country club associates, bragging about his son-in-law's visionary project, acting as an unpaid promoter for a sinking ship. They were determined to make Madison look like the flawless, victorious matriarch of Chicago real estate. The following afternoon, just hours before the gala was set to begin, the brass chime of my gallery door rang out. This time it was my mother and Madison. Madison was practically glowing, wearing a custom maternity gown that cost more than a small car, resting her hand protectively on her non-existent bump. My mother carried a cheap, clear plastic garment bag. They marched into my private office without knocking. My mother dropped the plastic bag onto my pristine mahogany desk. Inside was a stiff black polyester serving uniform, complete with a clip-on bow tie and a stained white apron. "What is this?" I asked, staring at the crumpled fabric, keeping my voice carefully neutral. "It is your uniform for tonight," Madison said, her voice dripping with venomous delight. "Bradley and I are hosting a massive investor gala to secure the final round of funding for Oak Ridge. It is going to be the social event of the season. Everyone who matters in this city will be there." My mother leaned over the desk, her eyes alight with a sickening, cruel satisfaction. "We know your little appraisal firm is failing, Clara. We know you are struggling financially since Bradley rightfully left you and cut off your access to his wealth. We decided to be generous and offer you a shift. You will serve champagne and clear empty plates." I looked between them, letting the sheer absurdity of their malice wash over me. They did not just want me broken and discarded. They wanted to parade my brokenness in front of high society. They wanted every investor, every gallery owner, and every socialite in Chicago to see the disgraced, mentally unstable Clara Wilson serving drinks to her radiant, triumphant younger sister. It was meant to be a calculated public execution of my dignity. They wanted to erase my standing in the business community completely. "You want me to wait tables at your party?" I asked, letting my voice waver perfectly, portraying a woman stripped of all her pride and fight. "It will be good for you," Madison sneered, adjusting a diamond tennis bracelet that Bradley had undoubtedly purchased with my stolen home equity. "It will teach you some much-needed humility. Plus, it will show our high-end investors that Bradley and I are charitable, forgiving people. We even employ the family failures when they hit rock bottom. Be at the service entrance by 6 o'clock sharp. Use the back door with the rest of the hired help. Do not speak to any of the guests unless you are spoken to first." My mother patted Madison's arm affectionately, casting a look of pure disgust in my direction. "Come along, darling. You need to rest before tonight. The stress of dealing with her is not good for the baby." They turned and strutted out of the office, their synchronized laughter echoing off the high ceilings of my gallery. They left the cheap polyester uniform lying across my desk, completely convinced they had delivered the final, crushing blow to my spirit. I reached out and ran my fingers over the rough synthetic fabric. I thought about Bradley sweating through his tailored suit tonight, begging a room full of strangers for $20 million to save himself from Apex Holdings. I thought about my parents beaming with unearned, arrogant pride, introducing Madison to billionaires. I thought about Madison parading around a multi-million-dollar property she firmly believed she owned. I picked up the uniform and held it up to the fluorescent light. A slow, genuine smile spread across my face, warming the ice that had settled deep in my veins. The stage was set perfectly. They had built their own scaffold, greased the gears, and tied the knot themselves, and now in their infinite blinding arrogance, they were inviting me to stand on the stage with them and pull the lever. I would put on their cheap uniform, I would carry their silver trays, I would serve them their champagne, and then I would watch them choke on it. "I will be there," I whispered to the empty room. The Ritz-Carlton ballroom was suffocating under the weight of imported white orchids and sheer, unadulterated desperation. From the moment I stepped through the gilded grand entrance, bypassing the service elevators, my mother had instructed me to use the scent of expensive champagne, and panic hit me like a physical force. Bradley had spared absolutely no expense for this gala, burning through what little operational cash he had left to create an illusion of invincibility. The room was a sea of Chicago's financial elite. Private equity vultures, hedge fund managers, and real estate moguls mingled under the massive crystal chandeliers. Bradley was working the room with a frantic, feverish energy. He was wearing a bespoke velvet tuxedo, his smile wide and practiced, but I could see the sweat glistening on his forehead from 50 feet away. He was pitching the Oak Ridge development not as a sinking ship, but as a highly exclusive invite-only equity buy-in. He needed $20 million by tomorrow morning to satisfy the Apex Holdings margin call, and he was begging these people for his life disguised as offering them an opportunity. Near the center ice sculpture, my parents were holding court. My father, holding a tumbler of scotch, was boasting loudly to a group of banking executives about his visionary son-in-law. He was inflating Bradley's portfolio, completely oblivious to the fact that the $100,000 check he had personally delivered to Bradley's office had acted as the financial detonator. Beside him, my mother was practically vibrating with unearned pride, accepting compliments from socialites about her impeccable family genes. And then there was Madison. She was standing near the grand staircase, acting as if she had personally laid the foundation for the Ritz itself. She wore a skin-tight emerald green silk gown that aggressively highlighted her new pregnancy, dripping in diamond jewelry that Bradley had undoubtedly secured using the forged equity loan against my house. She was the absolute picture of a triumphant, arrogant queen holding her new stolen kingdom. I stood at the edge of the ballroom, letting the chaotic symphony of the party wash over me. I had thrown the cheap stained polyester maid's uniform into a dumpster on my way here. I refused to play the broken, subjugated servant in their theatrical production of my demise. Instead, I wore a simple, elegant navy blue maternity dress. It was unadorned, modest, yet perfectly tailored, silently demanding dignity in a room built entirely on fraud. It took exactly 4 minutes for my presence to be noticed. I saw my mother's eyes dart across the room. Her performative smile instantly dissolved into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. She leaned over, whispering sharply into Madison's ear. Madison snapped her head in my direction, her perfectly contoured face contorting with rage. I had defied her direct order. I had walked into her moment of glory looking like an equal, not the disgraced, mentally unstable failure they had meticulously painted me to be. Madison marched across the marble floor, her emerald gown trailing behind her like a toxic spill. My mother flanked her, acting as her loyal enforcer. As they approached, the conversations in our immediate vicinity began to die down. The high society guests turned their heads, their eyes eager for the scandal they knew was coming. Bradley's ex-wife, the woman rumored to be crazy and carrying another man's child, had crashed the billionaire event of the season. "What do you think you are doing?" Madison hissed, stopping just inches from my face. Her voice was low but vibrating with a terrifying, unhinged anger. "Where is your uniform? You were told to use the service entrance. You are supposed to be clearing plates, Clara." I looked at her, keeping my face perfectly serene. "I am a guest, Madison. I decided to dress for the occasion." My mother stepped forward, grabbing my arm with bruising force. Her nails dug into my skin as she leaned in her expensive perfume, making me nauseous. "You arrogant, ungrateful wretch!" Patricia spat, her voice a venomous whisper, meant only for me. "We offered you a chance to earn some honest money since you destroyed your own life. You are ruining your sister's night. You are embarrassing Bradley in front of his investors. Get out of here right now before I have security throw you onto the street." I gently but firmly detached my arm from my mother's grip. I smoothed the fabric of my navy dress. "I am not going anywhere, Mother. Bradley invited the entire city to see the future of Oak Ridge. I have a vested interest in seeing how this plays out." Madison's eyes flared with a manic, dangerous light. She looked around at the wealthy guests who were now openly staring at our confrontation. She realized she had an audience. She realized she had the opportunity to execute the public humiliation she had craved since childhood. She turned and snatched a brimming crystal goblet of dark, heavy Cabernet from a passing waiter's tray. She did not hesitate. With a sharp, deliberate flick of her wrist, she threw the entire glass of red wine directly at my chest. The dark liquid splashed violently against my collarbone, soaking instantly into the modest navy fabric of my maternity dress. It dripped down my front like a gaping bloody wound, staining my skin and ruining the clean lines of my outfit. Several guests gasped out loud, stepping back in shock. Madison let the empty crystal goblet slip from her fingers. It shattered into a dozen pieces against the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing through the suddenly silent ballroom. Bradley, hearing the noise, stopped his desperate pitching and turned toward us, his face draining of color. Madison took a step back, pitching her voice so that every single investor, banker, and socialite in the vicinity could hear her clearly. "The place for a failure and a slut is in the kitchen," Madison declared, pointing a diamond-encrusted finger at the service doors. "You come in here trying to ruin my family's reputation with your illegitimate pregnancy. You are a pathetic, unstable mess. Get out." The silence in the ballroom was absolute. The string quartet had stopped playing. Hundreds of eyes were fixed on me, watching the red wine drip slowly from my dress onto the pristine floor. My father was staring at me with cold indifference, completely approving of the brutal execution taking place. Bradley remained rooted to his spot, too afraid of causing a further scene to intervene silently, begging me to run away and hide. I did not run. I did not cry. I did not lower my head in shame. I reached into my small clutch, pulled out a white silk handkerchief, and calmly, methodically dabbed at the wine on my collarbone. I looked directly into Madison's triumphant, glowing eyes. I let a slow, chilling smile spread across my face. It was a smile completely devoid of fear, a smile that made Madison's arrogant expression falter for a fraction of a second. Before Madison could open her mouth to demand my removal again, a sudden chaotic commotion erupted at the grand entrance of the ballroom. The heavy mahogany doors were thrown wide open by hotel security. The panicked voices of the valet staff echoed into the foyer. The sudden noise broke the tension of my humiliation, forcing every guest in the room, including Bradley and my family, to turn their attention away from me. Through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the hotel's circular driveway, the flashing lights of a private security escort illuminated the night. A massive fleet of 6 identical blacked-out executive limousines pulled up aggressively to the curb, tires screeching against the pavement. The sheer display of absolute intimidating power sent a ripple of frantic whispers through the crowd of investors. The master of ceremonies, an older, distinguished man hired by Bradley to manage the evening's announcements, rushed to the podium. He fumbled with the microphone, his hands visibly shaking, as he looked at the card a security detail had just handed him. The feedback whine of the sound system pierced the air. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC announced, his voice echoing over the hushed, breathless crowd. "We have an unexpected and highly distinguished arrival. Please direct your attention to the grand entrance. The mysterious chairman of Apex Holdings, the private investment fund that has just acquired the primary debt and controlling interest of the Oak Ridge project, has arrived." Bradley's entire body went rigid. The color completely vanished from his face, leaving him looking like a ghost in a velvet tuxedo. The phantom lender, the entity demanding $20 million by dawn, was walking through the front door. Madison forgot entirely about the wine on my dress. Her eyes widened with greedy, desperate anticipation, ready to charm whoever was about to step into the room. My parents straightened their posture, preparing to bow to the ultimate source of wealth. I stood quietly in the center of the room, the wine drying cold against my skin. I kept my eyes fixed on the grand doors, my smile sharpening into something lethal. As the entire ballroom surged forward, straining to catch a glimpse of the phantom billionaire entering the foyer, I used the chaotic shift in the crowd to step backward. I slipped quietly through a pair of velvet-draped service doors, leaving the suffocating heat and panic of the gala behind. The dimly lit service corridor was a stark contrast to the crystal-draped ballroom. Jamal was waiting for me exactly where we had planned, standing next to Mr. Harrington. Harrington, a man whose meticulously tailored charcoal suit radiated quiet generational wealth, held a heavy garment bag over his arm. I unzipped my wine-stained navy dress and let it pool at my feet on the concrete floor. It was the very last time I would ever wear the uniform of a victim. From the garment bag, Jamal handed me a piece of true armor. It was a custom haute couture coat, an architectural masterpiece crafted from deep crimson silk and structured velvet. It was a garment worth tens of thousands of dollars, featuring sharp, commanding shoulders and a sweeping hemline that moved with liquid, dangerous grace. I slipped my arms into the sleeves, feeling the heavy, expensive weight of it settle over me. I wiped the last faint smudge of Madison's cheap wine from my collarbone, applied a fresh coat of dark blood-red lipstick, and looked at the two men. "Are we ready?" Harrington asked, his eyes gleaming with professional anticipation. "Let us burn his empire to the ground," I replied. We walked down the corridor toward the main foyer, flanked suddenly by a security detail of 6 massive, unsmiling men in dark suits with earpieces. As we reached the grand mahogany doors, the master of ceremonies was still stammering into his microphone inside, desperately trying to maintain order among the panicked investors. Harrington gave a sharp nod to the lead security guard. The guards pushed the heavy doors open with a synchronized violent shove that cracked like thunder across the marble floors. The frantic whispering in the ballroom ceased instantly. Hundreds of faces turned toward the entrance, expecting to see a faceless, ruthless corporate raider flanked by corporate sharks. Instead, they saw me. I stepped over the threshold, my crimson coat catching the light of the chandeliers like a brilliant flare. Harrington walked to my right, projecting absolute legal authority, while the wall of security guards fanned out around us, creating a physical barrier of pure, unadulterated intimidation. The rhythmic clicking of my heels echoed through the cavernous, dead-silent room. The high society elite, the hedge fund managers, and the private equity vultures parted like the Red Sea, creating a wide, clear path leading directly to Bradley. I kept my gaze locked onto my ex-husband. Bradley was frozen in place. His jaw hung slack, his eyes wide and unblinking, his brain utterly failing to process the visual information. The arrogant, untouchable developer who had spent the last hour begging a room full of strangers for his life was now staring at the very woman he had systematically tried to destroy. He took a stumbling step backward, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Beside him, Madison looked as though all the blood had been drained from her body. Her hand slipped limply from her stomach, her emerald gown suddenly looking cheap and garish against the sheer power of my entrance. She took a step behind Bradley, physically shrinking away from the reality crashing down upon her. But my mother, entirely blinded by her lifelong delusion of superiority, refused to comprehend the scene unfolding in front of her. Her mind, hardwired to view me as a pathetic, subservient failure, instantly interpreted the entrance as a grotesque, insane prank. Patricia's face twisted into a mask of pure, unhinged fury. She broke away from my father and charged across the open floor, her high heels snapping aggressively against the marble. "You psychotic, delusional wretch!" Patricia shrieked, her voice shattering the quiet of the room. "How dare you impersonate an executive? How dare you rent these actors and this coat to humiliate your sister?" She closed the distance rapidly, raising her right hand high into the air, fully intending to slap me across the face in front of Chicago's wealthiest citizens. She wanted to physically beat me back into submission to restore her precious family hierarchy by force. She never even got close. Before her hand could begin its downward arc, two of my security guards moved with terrifying fluid speed. They stepped seamlessly in front of me, forming an impenetrable wall of muscle and dark fabric. One guard caught Patricia's raised wrist midair with a grip like a steel vise, halting her momentum instantly. The other guard placed a massive flat palm against her shoulder, pushing her backward with a calculated, forceful shove. Patricia stumbled, her arms flailing wildly as she struggled to keep her balance on her stilettos. She gasped in pain and shock, clutching her wrist where the guard had grabbed her. "Do not attempt to touch Ms. Wilson again, ma'am," the lead guard stated, his voice a low, booming rumble that carried absolute authority. "If you step forward, you will be physically removed from the premises and handed over to law enforcement." My mother stood trembling, her eyes darting frantically around the room. She looked at the elite guests, the people she had spent hours trying to impress, hoping they would intervene on her behalf, hoping they would validate her outrage. Instead, the billionaires and socialites were looking at her with undisguised pity and revulsion. They recognized true power when they saw it, and they recognized that Patricia had absolutely none. My father rushed forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her back into the crowd, his face flushed with profound, crushing embarrassment. He realized what she had not. This was no prank. I did not even break my stride. I continued walking, my crimson coat sweeping past my humiliated parents, past my terrified sister, and straight past Bradley, who was now trembling visibly. I stopped at the edge of the stage. Mr. Harrington ascended the short steps, bypassing the frozen, sweating master of ceremonies. Harrington took his position behind the podium and gripped the microphone. He tapped it twice with his index finger. The sharp, percussive thuds echoed like gunshots through the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen." Harrington began, his voice smooth, commanding, and utterly devoid of mercy. "I apologize for the dramatic interruption, but it is imperative that we correct a massive structural misunderstanding regarding the nature of this event. You were invited here tonight under the false pretense that this project is seeking equity investors. That is functionally incorrect." Harrington paused, his sharp gaze sweeping over the crowd before locking directly onto Bradley's panicked face. "Oak Ridge is no longer accepting bids." Harrington continued, his voice echoing perfectly in the silent room. "Oak Ridge is no longer under the control of its previous management. Allow me to formally introduce the sole registered owner of Apex Holdings LLC, the entity that currently holds the entirety of this project's mezzanine debt. She is the absolute owner of the Oak Ridge development and the primary undisputed creditor holding the collateral to Mr. Bradley's entire remaining portfolio. Allow me to introduce your host for the evening, Ms. Clara." The silence in the ballroom shattered into a million pieces. A collective gasp echoed off the crystal chandeliers, rolling through the crowd of Chicago's financial elite like a tidal wave. Bradley's face flushed a violent, dangerous crimson. The absolute panic in his eyes was instantly replaced by the cornered, rabid fury of a man watching his entire life disintegrate in real time. He lunged toward the stage, his hands balled into fists, spittle flying from his lips as he screamed. "She is lying!" Bradley roared, his voice cracking over the rising murmur of the investors. "This is a scam. She is my deranged ex-wife. She is a pathological liar and a filthy adulterer. Do not listen to a single word she says. She is trying to ruin me because I divorced her for carrying another man's bastard child." He pointed a shaking finger at me, desperately trying to reclaim control of his narrative. He turned his wild eyes toward the crowd of billionaires, hedge fund managers, and real estate moguls. "She forged those documents." He bellowed, his velvet tuxedo suddenly looking disheveled and absurd. "She is mentally unstable. Security, get this crazy woman out of my gala right now." But the security guards did not move. They answered exclusively to me. Before Bradley could take another step toward the podium, a tall, imposing figure stepped out from the shadows of the heavy velvet drapes. Jamal. He walked onto the stage with the calm, terrifying precision of an executioner. He did not look at Bradley. He simply walked directly to the master audio-visual control console that Bradley had rented to showcase his fraudulent development plans. Jamal plugged a decrypted flash drive into the main terminal. He tapped a single command on the keyboard. The massive 50-foot high-definition projection screen behind the stage flickered to life. Bradley's glowing architectural renders of the Oak Ridge development vanished instantly. They were replaced by the crisp, undeniable footage from the hidden security cameras I had meticulously installed in my own home months ago. The video played in brilliant, unforgiving color. There was no audio, but none was needed. The entire ballroom watched as a giant high-resolution projection showed Bradley and Madison tangled together in my marital bed. The footage clearly displayed the date and timestamp in the bottom right corner, establishing the affair long before our separation. The screen then cut to another angle showing Madison strutting through my living room in my expensive silk robe, kissing Bradley passionately while they poured champagne on my sofa. A collective shockwave of revulsion ripped through the high society crowd. The investors, the socialites, the bankers, they all stared at the screen, their mouths agape. Madison let out a shrill, piercing shriek. "Turn it off!" she screamed, covering her face with her hands, her emerald maternity gown suddenly making her look entirely ridiculous. "Turn it off right now!" But Jamal was only just beginning. He tapped another key. The sordid video disappeared, replaced by a stark clinical document bearing the official seal of Chicago General Hospital. It was Bradley's actual, unedited medical history. "You claim Miss Clara is an adulterer." Jamal spoke into the microphone, his deep, commanding voice cutting through the rising chaos of the ballroom. "You claim she became pregnant by another man because you underwent a vasectomy. You deliberately submitted heavily redacted forged medical records during your preliminary divorce filings to secure a favorable asset division and steal the equity of her home." Jamal highlighted a specific paragraph on the screen. The text was magnified tenfold for every single investor to read clearly. The truth, as verified by these subpoenaed medical records, is that Bradley Wilson never underwent any such procedure, Jamal announced. He canceled the surgery 48 hours prior to the scheduled date. Ms. Clara's pregnancy is entirely legitimate. Bradley fabricated a medical impossibility to frame his wife for infidelity, executing a calculated financial fraud to seize her personal assets to fund this very development project. The murmurs in the crowd turned into loud, angry exclamations. The hedge fund managers who had been considering handing Bradley millions of dollars were now glaring at him with pure, unadulterated disgust. In the cutthroat world of high finance, a personal affair was a messy scandal. But forging legal documents and committing gross financial fraud to steal from a spouse was a massive radioactive liability. Bradley was instantly branded as toxic, a ticking time bomb no investor would ever touch. I could see banking executives pulling out their phones right there on the gala floor, aggressively typing out messages to their teams to sever all ties with Wilson Development immediately. "No," Bradley shouted, his voice hoarse, backing away from the stage as if the screen itself was radiating intense heat. "That is fake. She paid someone to make that. You are all being set up." Jamal did not even blink at Bradley's frantic, pathetic denials. He looked down at his keyboard and hit the final command. The masterstroke. "If we are discussing illegitimate children," Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave, ringing with lethal authority over the speakers, "we should perhaps look at the child this entire gala was meant to celebrate tonight, the supposed heir to the Oak Ridge empire." The screen shifted one final time. It displayed a highly secure, encrypted laboratory DNA analysis report. The names were explicitly clear: Madison's name, Bradley's name, and the genetic markers obtained from the extensive prenatal screening Madison had so proudly and publicly flaunted on her social media accounts. "Probability of Bradley Wilson being the biological father," Jamal read aloud, letting the words hang heavily in the dead silent air. 0%. Bradley stopped breathing. The manic defensive energy drained from his body in an absolute instant. He slowly turned his head to look at Madison, his eyes wide with a sudden terrifying confusion. Madison was shaking violently, clutching her stomach, her face drained of all blood. She looked like she was about to pass out on the marble floor. But Jamal was not finished. He highlighted the final line of the laboratory report. However, Jamal continued, the genetic markers show a direct, undeniable familial match. A cross-reference with the National Genetic Registry and private samples obtained during our comprehensive forensic audit confirms the biological father. Jamal looked directly down at Bradley, his gaze entirely devoid of pity. The child Madison is carrying belongs to your sister's husband, Jamal declared, your own brother-in-law. The ballroom erupted. It was a spectacular, instantaneous detonation of high society decorum. The crowd of elite investors, strict bankers, and wealthy socialites completely lost their minds. Women gasped loudly, covering their mouths in utter shock. Men shouted in profound disbelief, shaking their heads at the sheer depravity of the situation. Dozens of smartphones were instantly pulled from expensive designer purses and tailored suit pockets. Camera flashes began to fire like a relentless strobe light across the room, recording every single second of the catastrophic fallout. The elite crowd, smelling blood in the water, turned into a digital firing squad. I stood near the podium, completely untouched by the chaos, my crimson haute couture coat shielding me like armor. I watched the absolute systematic destruction of the people who had tried to bury me. It was a sweet, intoxicating vindication. My parents, who had spent the entire evening strutting around the room boasting about their brilliant son-in-law and their perfect, victorious pregnant daughter, were completely paralyzed. Patricia and Richard stood rooted to the marble floor like stone statues. My father's grip went slack, and his expensive crystal tumbler of scotch slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. Neither of them moved. Their jaws were locked open, their eyes wide with a horrified, vacant stare. The elite social circle they had sacrificed me to join the billionaires they had tried to impress were currently laughing at them, pointing fingers and filming their ultimate disgrace. They were utterly, permanently ruined in Chicago society. They would never show their faces in this city again without the stain of this night following them. Bradley's knees finally gave out. The arrogant developer who had tried to steal my life, my home, and my dignity simply collapsed. He dropped heavily to the marble floor, the sharp crack of his knees hitting the stone completely drowned out by the shouting crowd. He knelt there in his custom velvet tuxedo, staring blankly at the massive projection screen that detailed his ultimate betrayal. He had lost his company, his wealth, his reputation, and now his future family. Madison was sobbing hysterically, backing away from the glaring lights of the smartphones, desperately trying to hide her face behind her hands, but there was nowhere to run. She was trapped in the center of the room, fully exposed for the treacherous, lying fraud she truly was. The glittering high society life she had stolen from me was currently burning her alive. The floor had finally given out beneath them, and I owned the entire building. Mr. Harrington stepped back, yielding the podium. I walked up the 3 velvet-lined stairs, the heavy crimson silk of my haute couture coat brushing against the polished wood. The silence in the Ritz-Carlton ballroom was absolute, a vacuum waiting for oxygen. Hundreds of Chicago's elites stared at me, their champagne flutes suspended in midair. I looked down at Bradley. He was trembling violently, his custom velvet tuxedo soaked in cold sweat. The realization of his absolute ruin finally shattered the last remaining fragments of his towering ego. He scrambled forward, his polished dress shoes slipping on the marble floor until he was practically groveling at the base of the stage. "Clara, please," he choked out, his voice cracking into a high, pathetic pitch. His face was contorted in pure terror. "Please do not do this. I was under so much pressure. The investors were threatening to pull out. Madison was demanding a lifestyle I could not afford. I panicked. It was a mistake, Clara. I swear to you it was just a terrible mistake. I never wanted to hurt you. We can fix this. Just give me time. I will pay you back every single cent. Please, you have to stop this." I stared at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, clinical satisfaction. I gestured to Harrington, who handed me a crisp, legal-sized document encased in a dark leather folder. I held it up for Bradley and the entire room to see. "Do you remember the $100,000 commercial bridging draft you deposited yesterday morning?" I asked, my voice echoing clearly through the pristine sound system. The one my parents so graciously delivered to your office to save your permitting timeline? Bradley nodded frantically, tears streaming down his face, smearing across his cheeks. Yes. Yes, I deposited it. It saved the site. I can give it back. I will wire it back right now. I shook my head slowly. You did not save the site, Bradley. You sold it. That specific draft was issued directly by Apex Holdings. By signing the endorsement line and clearing those funds, you legally accepted our mezzanine financing terms. And those terms included a zero-tolerance morality and fraudulent representation clause. Bradley swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically around the room, realizing the trap he had blindly walked into. When my legal team submitted the undeniable proof of your forged home equity loans and your fabricated medical records to the Federal Banking Commission this morning, you triggered an immediate, unappealable default. I declared, my voice slicing through the heavy air. Apex Holdings exercised its right of acceleration. Oak Ridge is no longer your visionary project. It is officially a wholly owned subsidiary of my company. You are trespassing on my property, Bradley. The crowd erupted into a low, buzzing frenzy. Private equity managers were pulling out their phones, frantically typing messages to their legal teams to verify the slaughter they were witnessing. Bradley let out a guttural, wounded sob and buried his face in his hands. He was entirely broken. But how he gasped, staring up at me with hollow, red-rimmed eyes. How did you get the capital to buy the debt? You had nothing. I took everything from you. I made sure you had nothing left. I smiled, a sharp, lethal expression. You took the scraps I allowed you to take, I corrected him. You were so busy tearing apart my checking accounts and celebrating your clever little thefts that you completely missed the $88 million inheritance left to me by my late mentor, Leo. Those funds have been sitting in a highly secure offshore trust waiting for the exact moment you made yourself vulnerable. That money funded Apex Holdings. That money bought your debt. And that money just officially deployed to wipe you off the map. A collective gasp ripped through the ballroom. The socialites and billionaires who had looked down on me moments ago were now staring at me with a mixture of profound awe and absolute terror. $88 million was not just wealth. In this room, it was unadulterated power. I was not finished. The sword had to swing one last time to sever the rotten roots of my past completely. I turned my gaze away from the pathetic shell of my ex-husband and locked eyes with my parents. Patricia and Richard were still standing where my security guards had pushed them. My father's face was the color of ash. My mother looked as though she was physically shrinking under the weight of the public humiliation. They thought the worst thing that could happen tonight was their social disgrace. They were entirely wrong. Richard. Patricia Vassage addressed them directly through the microphone, ensuring every billionaire they had tried to impress heard every single syllable. You were so eager to fund Bradley's empire. You were so desperate to secure Madison's luxurious future that you happily threw me to the wolves. You thought you were untouchable. You co-signed his fraudulent bridging loans. You put up your own personal assets to guarantee his success because you believed his lies over your own daughter. My father took a staggering step forward, his mouth opening in silent horror as the financial reality crashed down upon him. He was a businessman. He knew exactly what it meant to guarantee a defaulted loan. You thought you were backing a billionaire? I continued, my voice merciless and steady. But Bradley's assets are completely frozen, and Apex Holdings is first in line for liquidation. That means his secondary creditors are coming directly after his guarantors. They are coming after you. I leaned closer to the microphone, letting the finality of their ruin sink in. The sprawling estate on Beacon Hill. Your luxury vehicles, your offshore retirement portfolios. They were all listed as collateral. And because Bradley is now in total catastrophic default, your assets are forfeit. The bank has already initiated the seizure protocol. The foreclosure notices were drafted this afternoon and signed by a judge an hour ago. The authorities will be arriving at your property tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock to change the locks and begin the asset liquidation. You have exactly 12 hours to pack whatever you can carry. The reaction was visceral. My mother let out a strangled, breathless gasp and grabbed my father's arm to keep from collapsing. Her knees gave out and she sank to the marble floor, her expensive gown pooling around her. My father stood perfectly still, staring into the middle distance, his entire world evaporating before his eyes. The high society guests they had spent their entire lives worshipping, physically backed away from them, treating them like a highly contagious disease. In the world of extreme wealth, financial ruin was the ultimate sin, and my parents were now completely radioactive. Madison, realizing that her billionaire safety net was completely gone and her parents were destitute, began to scream. She screamed at Bradley, hitting his shoulders, demanding he fix it, demanding he get her money back, demanding he save their future. Bradley simply curled into a ball on the floor, ignoring her, utterly defeated, weeping into his hands. I stepped back from the podium. The air in the room felt crisp, clean, and entirely mine. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried since childhood, the constant need for their approval, the fear of their rejection was completely gone. I had not just defeated them. I had surgically dismantled their entire existence using their own greed and arrogance as the weapon. I looked at Mr. Harrington, giving him a curt nod. My security team instantly closed ranks around me, forming a protective barrier. We walked down the center aisle of the Ritz-Carlton ballroom, the crowd parting silently to let us pass. I did not look back at the wreckage of my family burning brightly behind me. The war was over, and I had won everything. But before the heavy mahogany doors could swing shut behind me, the sound of glass shattering and a guttural, animalistic scream echoed through the ballroom. The sheer volume of the despair forced me to pause on the threshold. I turned slowly, the heavy crimson silk of my coat brushing against the doorframe, and allowed myself one final look at the absolute carnage I had orchestrated. The grand ballroom of the Ritz-Carlton was emptying with the terrifying speed of a sinking ship. The high society elite, the billionaires, and the hedge fund managers were practically sprinting for the exits. They shoved past one another, abandoning full champagne flutes and plates of expensive caviar on the cocktail tables. In the cutthroat world of Chicago, real estate proximity to federal fraud was a terminal disease. Nobody wanted to be caught in the background of the photographs currently flooding social media. Within seconds, the massive, opulent space was deserted, leaving only a vast, empty expanse of marble floor surrounding the four people who had tried to destroy me. My father, Richard, stood completely catatonic near the ruined ice sculpture. His arms hung limply at his sides, his eyes staring blankly at the floor. He was a man who had built his entire identity on the illusion of control and financial superiority. In the span of 10 minutes, he had guaranteed the loss of his Beacon Hill estate, his offshore accounts, and his legacy. His brain had simply shut down entirely, unable to process the magnitude of his absolute ruin. My mother, however, was experiencing a very different kind of breakdown. The shock had finally burned away, leaving nothing but raw, unfiltered, vicious panic. The sophisticated, elegant matriarch mask dissolved completely. She looked around the empty room, realizing that her country club friends had fled, that her social standing was dead, and that she was going to wake up tomorrow morning completely destitute. Her manic, desperate eyes locked onto Madison. Patricia let out a screech that tore at the vocal cords, a sound devoid of any human dignity. She lunged across the distance separating them, her expensive stilettos sliding on the spilled wine. She threw herself at her favorite daughter, her hands forming rigid claws. She grabbed handfuls of Madison's custom emerald maternity gown, shaking her violently. "This is because of you!" Patricia screamed, her face twisting into a grotesque mask of fury. "You lied to me. You stole your sister's husband and brought this curse down on our heads. You promised me a billionaire. You stupid, arrogant girl. You made us lose absolutely everything." Madison gasped in shock, stumbling backward under the physical assault. She threw her arms up to defend herself, but Patricia was fueled by the hysterical strength of total financial collapse. My mother slapped Madison hard across the face, the sharp crack echoing loudly in the cavernous room. Madison shrieked, shoving our mother away with equal violence. The delicate silk of the emerald gown tore with a loud, sickening rip, exposing the expensive shapewear underneath. "Do not touch me," Madison sobbed, her perfectly styled hair falling into a messy, tangled halo around her tear-stained face. "I did not know. He lied to me too. I am the victim here." Patricia lost her footing on the slick marble and crashed hard onto her hands and knees. She did not bother to get up. She knelt in the puddle of spilled wine and broken crystal, tearing at her own hair, sobbing wildly into the empty room. Realizing that her mother was a broken, bankrupt shell, Madison turned her frantic, venomous attention to the only other target left in the room. She rounded on Bradley, who was still kneeling on the floor, staring blankly at his own hands. Madison marched over to him and began kicking his thigh, her pointed heels digging into his custom velvet tuxedo. "Fix this!" Madison screamed, her voice cracking with pure, selfish desperation. "You promised me a mansion. You promised me a trust fund for my baby. Get up and fix this, you pathetic, useless fraud. I ruined my life for you. Take responsibility." Bradley absorbed the blows for a long moment, completely unresponsive. Then slowly he raised his head. His eyes were bloodshot hollow and completely devoid of sanity. He looked past Madison's screaming face. He looked past my sobbing mother and my catatonic father. His gaze traveled across the empty ballroom and locked directly onto me, standing at the exit in my pristine crimson coat flanked by highly trained security and top-tier legal counsel. The sight of me untouched, immensely wealthy, and utterly victorious triggered something primal and violent deep within his fractured mind. The realization that he was going to lose his freedom, his wealth, and his reputation because of the woman he had severely underestimated ignited a suicidal, blinding rage. "You!" Bradley roared, the sound tearing from his throat like a wounded animal. He scrambled to his feet, ignoring Madison entirely. He lowered his head and sprinted across the polished marble floor directly toward me. His fists were clenched tight, his face contorted in a murderous snarl. He had completely abandoned any pretense of civilization. He wanted to physically tear me apart. "I will kill you, Clara," he bellowed, his footsteps hammering against the stone. "I will end you." I did not flinch. I did not take a single step backward. My heart rate did not even elevate. Before my hired security detail even needed to shift their formation, Jamal moved. My lead investigator stepped smoothly out of the shadows of the doorframe, placing himself directly in Bradley's path. Jamal did not brace for an impact. He initiated it. With terrifying, calculated speed, Jamal dropped his shoulder and drove his entire body weight directly into Bradley's chest. The impact sounded like a heavy sack of wet cement hitting a brick wall. Bradley was instantly lifted off his feet, the momentum of his sprint completely reversed. He slammed brutally backward onto the hard marble floor. All the air left his lungs in a violent, wheezing rush. Before Bradley could even comprehend the pain radiating through his spine, Jamal was on top of him. Jamal seamlessly grabbed Bradley's right arm, twisting it sharply behind his back. He pressed his knee heavily between Bradley's shoulder blades, pinning him face down against the cold stone with absolute, immovable force. Bradley gasped for air, his cheek mashed against the floor, entirely neutralized in less than 3 seconds. "Stay exactly where you are," Jamal ordered, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that commanded total obedience. As Bradley lay groaning under Jamal's knee, the wail of heavy sirens finally pierced the thick glass of the Ritz-Carlton windows. Red and blue lights began flashing erratically across the circular driveway, illuminating the night. The heavy thud of combat boots echoed loudly from the hotel lobby. A dozen uniformed Chicago police officers marched purposefully through the grand doors, their hands resting on their utility belts. They were accompanied by 2 stern-looking men in plain clothes wearing dark windbreakers, bearing the bright yellow letters of the FBI. The officers bypassed me entirely, the lead detective giving Mr. Harrington a brief professional nod of acknowledgement. Mr. Harrington stepped forward, calmly adjusting his charcoal suit jacket. "Officers, the suspect is secured," he stated, gesturing toward the floor. Harrington walked over to where Bradley lay pinned. He looked down at my ex-husband with the clinical detachment of a scientist observing a dying insect. "Bradley Wilson," Harrington said, his voice carrying effortlessly through the quiet room. Earlier this afternoon, my legal firm submitted a comprehensive unredacted dossier directly to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Federal Trade Commission. Bradley whimpered, squeezing his eyes shut, as the reality of the sirens finally registered in his panicked brain. That dossier, Harrington continued mercilessly, contained irrefutable hard evidence that you systematically forged vintage antique appraisal documents. You knowingly utilized those fraudulent appraisals to falsely inflate your net worth, securing multi-million-dollar commercial loans across state lines. You committed federal wire fraud, bank fraud, and grand larceny. The two FBI agents stepped forward. Jamal smoothly stepped back, allowing the federal agents to take control of the suspect. They hauled Bradley to his feet. He offered absolutely no resistance. His legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. The harsh metallic clicking of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting securely around his wrists echoed loudly. The lead agent began reading Bradley his Miranda rights, the standard, terrifying recitation ringing out clearly over the sound of my mother's continued weeping. Bradley did not look at Madison. He did not look at his ruined in-laws. He hung his head in total defeat, crying silently, as the officers began to march him toward the exit. He was a broken, pathetic shell of a man facing decades in a federal penitentiary. I stood perfectly still, committing the entire scene to memory. I looked at Madison, who was now sitting on the floor amidst the ruined ice sculpture, her hands covering her face as she sobbed into her torn dress. I looked at my parents, stripped of their arrogance, their wealth, and their dignity, reduced to groveling on the floor of a hotel they could no longer afford to enter. I had given them exactly what they had earned. The scales were completely balanced. I turned my back on the ballroom, the heavy silk of my coat swirling gracefully behind me. I walked out of the Ritz-Carlton, flanked by Jamal and Harrington, stepping out into the cool, refreshing air of the Chicago night. The oppressive, toxic weight of my family was finally gone. I walked toward my waiting car, stepping into my new life without ever looking back. One exact month later, the heavy oak doors of the Cook County Federal Courthouse swung shut behind me with a deeply satisfying, resonant thud. The sound marked the absolute conclusion of the ugliest chapter of my life. The humid July air of Chicago hit my face, smelling of warm asphalt and pure, unadulterated freedom. Mr. Harrington walked in step beside me meticulously, snapping his Italian leather briefcase shut. Inside that briefcase was the final judge-certified divorce decree. I had just spent the last 2 hours sitting in the front row of the courtroom watching Bradley's complete and utter destruction become a matter of permanent legal record. He had been escorted into the courtroom wearing a bright orange, ill-fitting jumpsuit, his wrists and ankles shackled in heavy steel chains. He looked absolutely wretched. His previously perfectly styled hair was greasy and thinning, his face gaunt, his eyes darting around the room with the frantic paranoia of a hunted animal. The federal judge, a stern woman with zero tolerance for white-collar criminals, had shown him absolutely no mercy. The forged antique appraisals, the fraudulent commercial loans, the wire fraud, and the gross misrepresentation of assets had stacked up into a mountain of irrefutable evidence. Bradley had attempted to plead for leniency, crying openly at the defense table, blaming the stress of the real estate market and claiming he was manipulated. The judge had silenced him with a single strike of her gavel. She sentenced him to 15 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary without the possibility of early parole. Furthermore, the court had mandated full financial restitution. Every single dime he had stolen from my accounts, every piece of equity he had fraudulently extracted from my home was returned to me with heavy interest. He was officially stripped of everything, leaving him to rot in a concrete cell for the rest of his miserable life. As Harrington and I reached the bottom of the courthouse steps, a sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. Jamal stepped out of the driver's side. He was wearing a sharp-tailored suit, looking every bit the victorious architect of our shared vengeance. It was the ultimate poetic twist that Bradley and Madison had never seen coming. Jamal was not just a brilliant private investigator I had hired off the street. Jamal was the brother-in-law. He was the man whose marriage Madison had systematically destroyed when she decided to sleep with Bradley. When Jamal had discovered the affair and the pregnancy, he had not confronted them with blind rage. He had found me. We had pooled our resources, our intellect, and our mutual desire for absolute justice. We had built the trap together. How did her hearing go? I asked, sliding into the back seat of the SUV as Harrington took the passenger side. Jamal adjusted his rear-view mirror, a cold, satisfied smile touching the corners of his mouth. "It is over," he stated, his voice smooth and professional. "The judge finalized our divorce this morning. Because of the irrefutable evidence of her infidelity and the strict morality clause I had embedded in our prenuptial agreement, Madison walks away with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no spousal support, not a single cent of my assets." Jamal put the car in gear and merged into the heavy city traffic. Furthermore, he continued, the judge ruled that she is solely responsible for the massive, catastrophic credit card debt she accumulated while trying to play the role of a billionaire socialite. She owes over $400,000 to various luxury retailers and creditors. She has no job, no home, and a baby on the way. She is currently packing her few remaining belongings into garbage bags, moving into a subsidized halfway house on the south side. I looked out the tinted window at the passing skyscrapers, feeling a profound sense of closure. Madison had wanted the glittering crown of high society, and she had sold her soul to get it. Now she was buried under a mountain of debt, carrying the child of a ruined man permanently exiled from the world she had sacrificed everything to join. My phone suddenly vibrated in my purse. I pulled it out and stared at the glowing screen. It was an unsaved, unknown local number. My thumb hovered over the decline button, but a sudden intuition made me swipe to answer. I lifted the phone to my ear, keeping my expression perfectly neutral. "Clara." The voice on the other end was raspy, broken, and practically unrecognizable, but I knew exactly who it was. It was Patricia. "Clara, please do not hang up," my mother begged, her words tumbling out in a frantic, panicked rush. The haughty, aristocratic tone she had cultivated for decades was entirely gone. She sounded like a desperate, terrified stranger. "Please, you have to help us." I leaned back against the leather seat. "Where are you, Patricia?" I asked, my voice as cold and flat as a sheet of winter ice. "We are at a motel," she sobbed, the sound wet and pathetic. "Out in Cicero. It is horrible, Clara. There is mold on the walls. We have no heat. The bank came with the federal marshals the morning after the gala. They gave us 10 minutes to pack. They took the Beacon Hill house. They took your father's car. They froze every single account. We have nothing left. We cannot even afford groceries for the week." In the background, I could hear the harsh, hacking cough of my father. The stress and the instantaneous plunge into severe poverty had physically broken him. The grand patriarch of the family was now a sick, destitute old man trapped in a squalid roadside motel room. "Clara, we are your parents," Patricia wailed, her voice pitching into a hysterical shriek. "You are a multimillionaire. You own Apex Holdings. You have more money than you could ever spend in a lifetime. You have to wire us some cash. You have to rent us an apartment. We will do anything you want. We will apologize publicly. Just please do not leave us here to die in this filth." I listened to her desperate pleading, feeling the phantom weight of every insult, every dismissal, and every cruel manipulation she had ever inflicted upon me. I remembered standing in their grand foyer, begging them to believe me over Bradley, only to have them toss me aside in pursuit of a fraudulent fortune. I let her cry for a long, agonizing minute. I let the absolute silence on my end of the line amplify her terror. "You raised me to understand the value of self-reliance," I finally said, my voice echoing with lethal clinical precision. "You taught me that weakness is a choice, and that expecting handouts is a character flaw. Do you remember what you told me when I asked for your help to save my home?" Patricia choked on a sob, entirely unable to answer. "You told me that in the real world, the strong survive and the weak perish." I continued, quoting her exact venomous words back to her. "You told me to stop embarrassing the family and deal with the consequences of my own actions. I am simply honoring the valuable lessons you worked so hard to instill in me." "Clara, please," she screamed, her voice cracking with pure, unadulterated horror. "We will freeze out here. We are your family." "No, Patricia," I corrected her. my tone dropping to a deadly quiet whisper. You are my investors, and I have permanently liquidated your shares. Independence is what you always taught me. Fend for yourselves. I pulled the phone away from my ear. I could still hear her frantic, hysterical screaming echoing from the small speaker. I tapped the red button, cutting off the sound of her suffering instantly. I opened my call settings, selected the unknown number, and tapped block permanently. I dropped the phone back into my purse and looked toward the front seat. Jamal caught my eye in the rearview mirror and gave a small, respectful nod. Harrington continued reviewing a commercial real estate contract on his tablet, the picture of absolute professional focus. The black SUV glided smoothly down Michigan Avenue, merging seamlessly into the rushing current of the city. The towering glass and steel skyscrapers reflected the bright, blinding light of the midday sun. Oak Ridge was mine. The company was mine. My future, entirely untethered from the toxic anchors of my past, was finally mine. I smoothed the lapel of my coat, took a deep, steadying breath of the air-conditioned air, and leaned back to watch my city pass by. The cool air of the Chicago night outside the Ritz-Carlton was the very first breath of my actual life. The heavy, suffocating atmosphere of deception and conditional love was left behind, those grand doors sealed away with the people who had tried to destroy me. The months that followed that spectacular detonation moved with a swift, purposeful grace. The chronic stress and toxic anxiety that had constantly plagued my nervous system simply vanished. In their place grew a fierce protective focus on the new life developing inside me. When the time came, my son was born in a private sunlit suite overlooking the vast expanse of Lake Michigan. He arrived healthy, strong, and entirely oblivious to the monumental war his mother had waged to secure his future. Holding him against my chest for the very first time, listening to his strong, steady cries, the last lingering ghosts of my past finally dissolved into nothingness. Looking down at his perfect, innocent face, I made a silent vow. He would never know the taste of conditional love. He would never be used as a pawn for social climbing or financial gain. He would be raised in an empire built on absolute truth. 6 months after Bradley was led away in federal handcuffs, I stood in the center of a sprawling, magnificent space in the heart of the River North Gallery district. This was not a sterile, soulless real estate development firm built on lies and stolen equity. It was the Leo Vanguard Foundation of Fine Arts. Using a portion of the vast wealth Leo had entrusted to me, I had purchased the historic brick and timber building and transformed it into a world-class gallery and educational center for emerging, underfunded artists. The pristine white walls were adorned with brilliant, passionate works of art. It was a living, breathing testament to the mentor who had believed in my vision when my own family had treated me like a disposable asset. The polished hardwood floors gleamed under the track lighting, and the massive arched windows let in cascading pools of late afternoon sunlight. I walked through the quiet, elegant space, the soft tapping of my heels creating a familiar rhythm. But this time, it was a rhythm of profound peace, not war. This was my sanctuary built exactly to my specifications, funded by a man who had recognized my true worth. The heavy glass front door swung open and Jamal walked in. He looked exceptionally sharp in a tailored navy suit carrying a thick leather portfolio. We had moved far past our initial arrangement as employer and private investigator. Jamal possessed a brilliant analytical mind and a fierce, unwavering loyalty that money simply could not buy. We were bound by a shared survival, having both been targeted by the same greedy, deceitful people. When I officially restructured Apex Holdings to manage my massive new portfolio, there was only one person I trusted to oversee the empire. Jamal was now my chief financial officer, a trusted partner in every sense of the word. He walked over, handing me a stack of bound financial summaries, a genuine smile softening his usually stern features. The gallery looks incredible. Clara, he said, his deep voice echoing pleasantly in the open space. The opening gala is fully booked for next weekend. The catering is finalized, The press releases are out, and the quarterly reports for Apex are exceeding our most aggressive projections. We are operating at a massive surplus. I took the folder, glancing over the immaculate numbers. Thank you, Jamal. I could not have built this infrastructure without you. He shook his head slightly, his expression turning serious and respectful. You built this, Clara. You had the vision and the capital. I just helped you clear the debris off the construction site. We briefly discussed the final lingering details of the past. It was no longer a source of pain, merely an administrative cleanup. The updates were short and clinically satisfying. Bradley was currently serving his first year of a 15-year sentence in a maximum security federal facility. The prison environment had completely stripped him of his velvet tuxedos and his false, arrogant bravado. Madison, thoroughly ruined by the catastrophic credit card debts she had accumulated during her delusion of grandeur, had finalized her divorce from Jamal. Because of her blatant infidelity, she walked away with absolutely nothing. She had vanished into obscurity, heavily pregnant, and forced to move into a subsidized halfway house on the south side, left to survive in the very poverty she had so desperately tried to escape. And my parents had suffered the most poetic justice of all. Having lost their Beacon Hill estate, their luxury cars, and their precious social standing, they were currently living in a cramped, dilapidated apartment on the outskirts of the city. The elite friends they had sacrificed me to impress had instantly abandoned them. They had attempted to call me exactly once, from a prepaid phone, weeping hysterically and begging for financial salvation. I had listened to their frantic pleas for exactly 10 seconds. I calmly reminded them that they had spent my entire life teaching me to value absolute independence above all else. I told them to pull themselves up by their bootstraps, just as they had demanded I do. Then I hung up the phone and blocked their number permanently. They were entirely forgotten, erased from my timeline without a second thought. A soft, joyful cooing sound broke the quiet atmosphere of the gallery. I turned to see my nanny pushing a designer stroller through the main archway. I smiled, handing the financial reports back to Jamal, and walked over to lift my son into my arms. He felt warm and solid, his tiny hands immediately gripping the silk fabric of my blouse, his bright eyes locking onto mine with pure, unfiltered trust. I carried him over to the massive front window, bathed in the golden late afternoon sunlight. I looked out at the bustling, vibrant streets of Chicago. The people walking below had no idea of the vast empire I commanded or the hellfire I had walked through to build it. The people who had tried to crush me, who had viewed my kindness as a weakness to be exploited, were currently drowning in the dire consequences of their own insatiable greed. I had not destroyed them. I had simply handed them the bill for their own arrogance. Armed with the undeniable truth, absolute self-respect, and the unyielding power of complete financial independence, I had constructed a kingdom where only loyalty and authenticity were permitted to thrive. My son would inherit a legacy of strength, not a lineage of deception. I pressed a gentle, lingering kiss to my son's warm forehead, feeling a profound, untouchable peace settle over my entire soul. The storm had finally passed, washing away every trace of the filth that had once clouded my vision. I used to think I lost everything on that rainy night, but in reality, that was simply the night the trash took itself out of my life.